This is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault. It is officially that time of year. Yep, that's right, it is the end of March, which means it is the best of the year season. For regular listeners of the show, you likely know the drill, but if you are new, I wait until after the Oscars to make my top 10 list. Because when I started the show, it took me a while to finish catching up on the year's best films, and the fact that I do the Oscar death race means I'd be leaving off some great titles if I made a list back in December. Joining me after she finally apologized for what she did, and trust me, she knows what she did, is Rachel Ho, the film editor at Exclaim and co-founder of The Asian Cut, and most importantly, the former co-host of a little podcast called ContraZoom. Rachel was last heard on episode 279, Most Anticipated Movies of 2024. So welcome back to the show, Rachel. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for allowing me back, and I'm glad we were able to put those differences behind us. That's good.
Your apology seems sincere enough.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
try.
Yeah.
I tried to, just really put some effort into it, and I'm glad it came off as sincere. That's helpful.
Yeah, using your own blood to write a "I'm sorry" letter, that's dedication.
I got that from what was that? It was like a
Simpsons?
Simpsons. Yeah, it's The Simpsons.
Sideshow Bob writing his letters.
I'm all about Frasier Crane in every form. So there you go.
Amazing. But it is great to have you back. It has been almost a year since you were last on. And, at that time, I think that was the announcement where you were kind of officially stepping back. And I was like, don't worry, this won't be the last time you hear from Rachel. Fast forward.
Have I not been back
11
since?
months. That episode came out in May.
Announced it?
Yeah.
And that was when you fired me?
Yes, when I fired you. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, no, because we did the top 10 of the year from last year, which is always kind of like end of March sort of thing. And then I took a couple weeks off, and I think you weren't on the first episode or two. And then we did our rest of the year preview, and that was the last time.
Right. Interesting. Wow. Yeah. It's been a whole year.
It's been a whole year. Yeah. All right. Well, the way this show will works is we will each share our picks 10 through 1, and along the way I'll be sharing some voicemails from friends of the show who sent in messages about their favorite film from last year. Before we begin, I'd like to know what you sort of thought of the movie year overall and how you went about making your list.
I am on the side of it wasn't the greatest year for film. I personally, I found some good stuff, I think in the top 10s, and there's things that I left off my list that I think could have found a place, but I just wasn't that. I didn't find anything that I was overly. I shouldn't say overly enthused with, because some of these ones I think are going to end up being all-time favorites, but I just felt overall it was a bit of a weaker year. And I mean, people have given me a lot of excuses. They're like, oh, it's, the strikes and this and that, which I do understand, obviously, that is going to delay things and potentially rush things as well on their end. But I didn't feel like it was the strongest year, especially coming off 2023, which I did think was a very, very strong year for movies. But this year wasn't as strong. And not just in Hollywood too. I would say internationally, I don't think it was as good as in previous years. But hopefully, I'm hoping for a comeback in 2025. How about you?
Yeah, I feel like I feel sort of similarly. I always sort of bristle when people are like, "Oh, it wasn't a good movie year. There are no good movies."
Mm-hmm.
And I look at obviously we're going to be talking about our 10 favorite films, and I love all of them. And then even throughout, there's a whole bunch of stuff I really enjoyed. I think maybe what was lacking this year is the sort of bigger budget, higher profile director stuff didn't really hit as well. Whereas I looked through my list, and it's a lot of, whether it's first time or emerging directors or really, really small films that kind of was oh, this is interesting and unique. I really am digging this. And so that sort of aspect I think was really good for me. But I sort of agree. Overall, especially I found with the documentaries and the international films this year were just not as strong as they were in years past.
And what do you attribute that to? I mean, I feel like the strikes is such an easy answer, but is that it? Do you think that's what it was?
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of it just comes down to timing and luck in terms of when a group of good movies comes out. And, one thing I finally did for the first year is normally I count when I see a movie as its release year. So if I see stuff at festivals, and for the first time I have started to push forward movies that I saw, whether it was at TIFF or VIFF or any other festival, that didn't get a wide release, I pushed it to my next year's list. So I already have a sizable 2025 list already, just by virtue of the fact that there's a bunch of festival stuff that I saw that hasn't gotten distribution. And maybe if I had kept that on my 24 list, it would have been an even stronger year, because there's quite a few that I really loved, specifically Canadian films in general.
Yeah.
I don't really know what it is. You look at movie years, whether it's 1999 or 2007 or things like that, where you're like, oh my God, there's like 50 of the greatest movies ever released came out that year. How is that possible? Then, you look at the very next year and it's a blank slate, basically. And I don't know what the reasoning or rationale is.
Sometimes I don't think there is. Maybe it's just a bit of luck. Maybe it's just kind of like, that's just kind of how the cards fell one year. It happens. Like, think of a sports team like baseball. Sometimes the Jays have a good year. Most times
More
it's a
often
bad
not.
year, and that's fine. We stick by them no matter what. But I do agree. I think the biggest exception, and you and I have talked about it actually, was Canada. I think Canada actually had a really, really good year for film. But the weird thing with Canadian movies is because a lot of them kind of hold their release until the year after they've premiered. So we watch them during the TIFFs and the VIFFs, and we enjoy them. And they feel like a 2024 movie, but then they actually don't come out till 2025 because of the CSAs, which is, I think, a shame for them, because sometimes then it gets a bit not pushed under the rug, but by the end of 2025, like, you kind of forget about some of them, which is not fair to those movies. But we will remember them because they are Canadian, and as it is important right now to remember the Canadian films and support them.
Yes. This is definitely a new methodology for me to be using, and I think it works. I think it was one of those things where I just had to commit to being like, it's fine. This is not a 24 movie; it's a 25 movie. And
what made you decide to do that?
I think it's because too often I'll see someone's top 10 list, and I was like, that was a movie from the year before. Why are you talking about it now?
Yeah.
And I guess that's just me being pedantic and being stubborn about it. So I don't really have a good reason. It was more just like, okay, everyone else seems to make it just fine of pushing things back to when they are actually released. And the fact that I'm not even doing my top 10 list till March means that, like, I do have that good amount of time where, like, I can catch up with the stuff that comes out on Christmas and it can still be eligible for my list. Like, stuff like The Brutalist and Nosferatu and Baby Girl, that all came out on Christmas Day, basically.
Yeah.
And
True.
that counts for me. Whereas, you and I fill out enough, top 10 best of the year publication votes for various outlets. And, you have to basically be making your list by, like, mid-November.
Yeah, it's insane. So for Exclaim, we start putting it together like early. I think by like end of October. I'm actually it's early. It's early for a variety of reasons. It's like, because, well, one, it's pulling together a bunch of the writers and getting and making sure that we have everything in on time and stuff like that. But if you work as a critic, or like you side gig as like a critic, then you get access to a lot of stuff by, like, I'd say mid-November. Most of us have seen pretty much everything that will be eligible for the year. But a lot of writers on Exclaim are not like professional critics or don't have that type of access. And so you ask them to do a list and they're just like, wait, what? Like, there's so much coming out at the end of the year that sound like they could be contenders because of the way that they're being marketed and the way that people have talked about them at like early festivals and things like that. And I get, like, I do sympathize that it's not quite fair, because then if we talk to those same writers, if I asked them to poll it again, say in January, then it would probably be completely different what their top 10s are. So it is a funny thing when you look at publication stuff that you have to do it really early, and most people will not. And so it means that every year there will always be films that get left off. Like, even if I try to sneak some stuff in, like, I always try to leave a little bit of space for being like, I'm going to watch some stuff, and by mid-November, like I said, I'll probably have seen everything. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's an interesting thing. Like you said, like trying to do the top 10s for different outlets and stuff like that, because it goes a lot earlier than you expect it to.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, before we start with our number 10 picks, I kind of wanted to mention the films that we talked about for our preview podcast that you were the last guest on.
Mm.
So our most anticipated films for 2024, from basically May till December. And the movies that I went with were The Bikeriders, Kinds of Kindness, Wolfman, Gladiator 2, and Nosferatu. And obviously,
Sure.
Wolfman ended up being pushed back to 25, so that didn't come out in time. But other than that, I feel like it's a pretty decent list.
Yeah.
I quite like The Bikeriders. Kinds of Kindness was very weird and wasn't my favorite Yorgos, but I still enjoyed it. Gladiator 2, I'm definitely a defender of that. And while Nosferatu was my number one movie, anticipation, I was pretty mixed on it, but I still had a lot that I really enjoyed about it too.
It's a very good movie. It was a very,
Yeah.
very good movie. But that's a good list, though. I was actually going to say I was impressed, like, most of it, with the exception of one, got released
hmm
because that's the gamble, usually. That's the big gamble.
Yeah, I feel like when I do that sort of list, I try to only pick movies that have confirmed release dates
Oh,
because it does
so
make that easier.
so for Exclaim, like I always put out like a anticipated in January, right?
Yeah.
Mickey 17 had confirmed releases. Doom 2 had confirmed releases, and it was like showing up. What was the other one? Ballerina, the John Wick one, the
Oh
John
yeah.
Wick spinoff. All of those had like confirmed dates. Like they were like, these are the dates it's going to come out, and then didn't happen.
Yeah.
But c'est la vie.
Do you
Do you
want
know
to
what mine?
hear
Yes, I
your
was going to
list?
say what are mine?
Okay, yours was Twisters, Trap, Speak No Evil, Wolves, and Mustafa, the Lion King. Mufasa, the Lion King.
Mustafa.
Yeah, I don't know why I said that way. Mufasa.
Sorry, so can you say that again? So
Twisters, Trap,
Twisters. Yeah.
Speak No Evil,
Yeah.
Wolves, and Mufasa.
Oh, that was such a bad list with the
Yeah.
exception of Twisters. Twisters
Yeah.
was a lot of fun. I will admit I didn't even watch two of those movies.
Which
How
ones?
terrible is that? Trap and Speak No Evil.
And
So
that's why you put that movie on your list because you were a fan of the original so
I
much.
know, and then yeah, so that one I did mean to watch, and then the problem with that one was it came out during TIFF, and then it was just like things were just so busy around that time. I just kind of forgot about it, and then
Yeah.
they didn't. This sounds like such a weak excuse, but it's like they didn't do a really big push on it for awards. They, as in, I think it's Universal, if I'm not mistaken. And so it just kind of fell by the wayside for me. I should really watch it. I heard it was good. Like I heard it was actually a very good movie. Trap, same thing. Warner Brothers didn't. Again, this sounds so dumb. Warner Brothers didn't give critics a screening in Toronto, and therefore I didn't watch it. I've been meaning to, though, because I still think that looked like a really good movie. But Twisters was fun.
Mm-hmm.
I'll
I
say
also really
that
like Wolves
Twisters
as
was
well.
fun. I was very mixed on Wolves. I wasn't huge on it. To me, the movie that like of that nature of just like watching something that was just kind of for the actors more than anything else. I
Mm-hmm.
really like The Instigators. Did you watch that? Is
No,
it
which one
called The
was
Instigators?
that?
It's Matt Damon and Casey
Oh,
Affleck.
Casey Affleck, yeah.
So both of them Apple TV movies releases. And kind of not a similar vibe in the slightest, but in the similar vibe of you just kind of throw it on and you just kind of enjoy it. Like it's not going to
Mm-hmm.
be the greatest movie of the year, but it's an entertaining film. And Wolves didn't really do that for me, but The Instigators did. I really like
Okay,
that movie. Oh, I should
that's
put
fair.
that on my list. I completely forgot about that movie.
Yeah.
I watched it like 5 times the week that after I watched it once, then I kept watching it again because it was just a very nice movie. I really should put that on my list.
There
My
we go.
bad. Well, there you go. I mentioned it now. So
Yeah.
fine.
All right. Well, we're going to now start with our number 10 film. So, Rachel, why don't you lead us with what is your last place film on your best of list?
So number 10 is one of your anticipated ones was The
Mm-hmm.
Bikeriders, Jeff Nichols movie, and that was a film based off of a photo book by Danny Lyon about a motorcycle club, and I say club very specifically, called the Vandals, and they're or sorry, the actual club is called the Outlaws, I think it was. Yeah, the Outlaws, and they were based out of Chicago. Danny followed the club back in like the late 60s into the early 70s, and they did a film just based off of pictures, and it's Austin Butler, Jodie Comer, Tom Hardy. I really love this movie. I'm big on vibe movies, and this is a
Yeah.
real vibe movie. Like, it's just, I don't know what I was expecting. This was, speaking of release dates getting moved back, this one had a very, very strange release, and that it almost looked like it wasn't good the way that people were dropping it. Like, it was some,
Well, it got sold a couple times, didn't it?
yeah. And it was just like, why don't people want this? And so you kind of
Yeah.
think, okay, well, maybe it's not really good. And then I go in and watch it, and I thought it was incredible. And I
Yeah.
actually thought Jodie Comer would get a little bit more heat on it for actress, but nothing really came of it. I don't know if it came a little bit too early, but um, I really enjoyed it though. I just thought it was such an interesting film. It's not perfect. I will say it's not a perfect movie by any stretch of the imagination, but I think across the year, this was one that it stuck with me, given that it came out earlier in the year. And then by the end, I was still thinking about it. The 10 spot is funny because you kind of, I think the first like five, your numbers 1 through 5 are relatively easy to
Mm-hmm.
pick. Like, these are the five, you just kind of have to order them. Like 7, 8, 9, 10, I find those the trickier spots because a lot of things could fit in, and I think that's especially true for the number 10 spot. But for me, the Bikeriders was a very perfect number 10 movie for the year.
Yeah. I don't know what's up with Mike Nichols and his like career trajectory because like he seemed like
Jeffrey Nichols.
Jeff Nichols, sorry. Yes, not Mike Nichols. Very different director.
Very different.
Yeah, very different. Jeff Nichols. Were like he seemed to like be gaining more and more buzz with each release, whether it was like Take Shelter, Midnight Special,
hmm
and he got some Oscar nominations for Loving.
Mud. Mud, he did
Mud.
very well with that too, yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty early on. And then like it just seemed like all the buzz came out of his sales and I don't know why. And so like
Yeah.
with this movie when it came out, like yeah, there's all the sales and it was eventually just like we're like, okay, I guess we have to show it in theaters because we have to put it out. And I think the reaction was it's fine, and because the reaction was just it's fine, it got ignored, and so no one
Yeah.
talked about it. Like it's not even like oh my god, did you see the latest Jeff Nichols movie? It's so bad, because then you at least have people talking about it. No, just no one talked about this movie. I watched it months later because I was like, oh crap, I forgot that there's the Bikeriders came out.
Yeah, it's too bad. I mean, this movie might show up on yours, but Civil War kind of fell into that space of it
Mm,
came out. It did really well when it came out. Actually, people were
hmm.
really hyped for it, and then by the end of the year, it's like just people forgot. And that, I think, speaks very speaks a lot to how influential the studios are in terms of what they're promoting come end of the
Yeah.
year, and how much that influences our decisions. Like I said, like Speak No Evil, it just kind of went quiet towards the end of the year, and so I kind of forgot about it. Like, and so
Hmm.
if it's not pushed in my face because so many things are coming out at that time and are kind of like basically begging for your attention, things that aren't just kind of go away. And Bikeriders, I think, was one of them.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. All right, well, let me go to my number 10 film, and that is The Seed of the Sacred Fig, directed by
Ah.
Mohammad Rasulov. An investigating judge struggles with paranoia amid political unrest in Tehran caused by the death of a young woman. When his gun goes missing, he suspects his wife and daughters, imposing harsh measures that fray family ties. So, I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the year of movies, and one of the things I pointed out was I thought international films were pretty weak. And specifically at the Oscars, the 5 that were nominated,
Yeah.
they were all sort of fine. And this was the last one I got to. And I was like, this was the movie I was waiting for. Because normally that's my favorite category at the Oscars.
Mhm.
There's the most bold and interesting movies that get nominated in that category. And this movie kind of plays out as like two separate things. You get like this first half where it's this sort of docu-realism about like the changing tides of feminism in Iran in respect to the hijab and things like that. And it's so interesting to watch how these two girls, who one of them is college age and one of them I think she's high school age or something like that, basically are getting direct news from social media, from Instagram, from TikTok and things like that, where they're seeing these protests happening in real time and the sort of police brutality being inflicted upon them and things like that. And then they'll go home and watch the news with their parents, and all it is lies about like what the actual events that were happening and who was instigating what, who was doing what. It's all fascinating stuff. And then the second half becomes much more intimate as the father, after his gun goes missing, takes the family to an old family home in this, small country village sort of thing. And it basically becomes like a paranoid thriller at this point where he's literally interrogating his own family members on camera and things like that, trying to figure out what happened to his gun and what their role is in this sort of new activism in Iran. But yeah, I absolutely love this film. This is the type of movie that like I live for. I love the sort of social realism aspect. I love the thriller aspect. This completely worked for me. Was this one that you saw?
I did, yeah. It's so funny to me because some people really didn't like this movie. Like I talked to
Yeah.
some colleagues who absolutely hated it, and you say it's two movies. I would actually argue there's a third like spaghetti western thing going on at the very very end of the film, which where I think a lot of people get lost on the
Yeah.
movie. They're like, well, what is going on here? Like it could have been a really tight political thriller, and it is a long movie. I will say it's a lot longer
It
than I
is.
thought it was going to be. I just
It's
kind of
almost three
watched it.
hours. Yeah.
I didn't realize it. I should have looked at the time bar, but I just sat back and I watched. I'm like, this movie's still going on. I'm like, I'm still sitting here. I really enjoyed it though. I really love Iranian films. I think that
Hmm.
they have an artistry for storytelling and visual storytelling that I think is very, very unique to the country and to their culture. And it's been interesting to see as that country has evolved in different ways, some for the better, some for the worse. It's the filmmaking has gone with it like over the different decades, and this one is such an interesting response to everything that was going on. And I will plug an interview that we did on the Asian Cut. Alicia interviewed Mohammed Russelov, and he was very glowing about this new generation of Iranians. He kept talking about how he was inspired by them, which is why he made the film. And that when I read her interview, it made me appreciate the film that much more because he's looking at the younger generation and knowing what he's gone through in his lifetime and how he has seen Iran change in his lifetime. It's really encouraging that a film like this comes out and it's in a direct response to how he's been inspired by a younger generation and how it almost feels hopeful for that generation in a sense.
Hmm.
So I there's so much about that movie I think there is to love. And yeah, I don't know, the people who didn't care for it, I don't, where's their whimsy? And they liked Wicked, so I'm like, get out of here.
That's fair enough. All right. Well, let us move on to your number 9 film.
My number 9 is a movie called Sing Sing. I really love this. It was directed by Greg Quidar, starring Coleman Domingo and Clarence Macklin. And it is about the Sing Sing maximum security prison and a actual like real life rehabilitation program that was started inside the prison to encourage inmates to um, kind of join the arts and put on plays, put on musicals, whatever it is, like to rehab through the arts. And music is basically what the film is. It's based off of a true story, with the exception of obviously of certain well-known actors like Coleman Domingo and Paul Racy. A lot of the supporting cast, pretty much all of the supporting cast, were former inmates, people who went through the program itself. And I found this film so inspiring and really I was very in awe of it afterwards when I watched it. And I just think I know Coleman Domingo got nominated for everything under the sun, and Clarence Macklin did very well as well. He got nominated for quite a bit too, but it still feels to me like a movie that didn't get the appreciation it should have over the course of last year for all of the awards season and things like that. I just think it's such an incredible story. And when we think of films, like what those of us who really love film or like movies, books, any type of art form, I feel like a movie like Sing Sing is a really good example of what art can do for people. And yeah, I just found it such, I didn't know about the program before watching this film. And I just think it's a really incredible story that I hope more people kind of watch in the years to come.
Yeah, I had heard of other prison systems using arts as a form of rehabilitation, and as someone who not that went to prison, but grew up going to art schools, and that's why I studied in college and things like that. Was acting. This it's a subject that really spoke to me, and so I really appreciate this film and what the themes it was touching on were. And sort of similar to the Bikeriders, while Sing Sing, A24 was distributing it and put it out in theaters, it was only in theaters for a very short period of time, never really expanded, and then it wasn't available to watch anywhere. Like, you couldn't rent it on VOD, it wasn't streaming, it took months and months and months. It wasn't until, when Oscar season started up that, they were slowly re-releasing it in theaters, and I still feel like a whole bunch of people missed because they just couldn't see it.
Yeah, and it's, the Oscars are, I have my allergy to the Oscars and, the whole award season function, whatever. But they are good for this reason. It's I hope that people looked at the Best Picture nominations or the Best Actor nominations, and they're like, what is this movie? Sing Sing. And tried to go and watch it. I'm starting to believe A24 is possibly one of the worst studios to do campaigning for award season. They don't do very well. It's they choose a couple things and they tend to choose wrong usually.
Yeah.
And this movie to me was such a missed opportunity for them, because I just think, yeah, I mean, I've already said enough about it, but it to me, it exemplifies everything that we want in a film. And, Coleman Domingo, he's so good. He's so good in this movie. Everything he's in, he's amazing. And I'm it's really satisfying to see him get kind of the attention that he got from this movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how A24 can possibly be the best studio for producing and buying talented films at festivals and being the worst studio at distributing them.
It's unbelievable to me. And I won't lie. I mean, I feel like, I don't want to say they've peaked. But it does feel like that thing that A24 is, it's whatever made them special is starting to lose its shine a little bit now, I think. And Neon has always quietly been there. But even, I mean, Neon's head, he did a thing, an interview not that long ago, and he was like, A24 is not our competition. That's not our, we don't care about A24. I'm like, damn Neon. That's harsh to say, I think, maybe he said it on purpose because A24 really is their competition. But
I looked at that quote, and I've seen enough of them praising each other's films. I don't think they view each other as competition. I think that they view each other as peers. Because he was talking about how, what was the movie? There was a couple movies that Netflix ended up buying that they were trying really hard to get, and I wish I could remember them off the top of my head.
Hitman was one of them. Yeah. I can't remember what the other one would be.
Because, at least with A24, they're putting their movies in theaters, whereas Netflix isn't. And then, Hitman is popular for a week, and then it goes off your front page, and you never see it again.
And one thing, I mean, this is really in the weeds, but to talk about as Canadians, Netflix Canada did not buy Hitman.
Yeah.
Or Maria. And so when it was out in the States, we had it in theaters, and less people watched it in theaters, obviously. And then when eventually it popped up on Netflix in Canada, it was the most random thing for it to just kind of come up. And then everyone's like, oh, you just one day went onto Netflix and then it was on your front page, basically.
Yeah.
So it's a very strange thing, though.
It is, yeah. All right, I'm going to go on with my number 9 film, and that is Dune Part 2, directed by Denis Villeneuve. Paul Atreides unites with the Fremen while on a warpath of revenge against the conspirators who destroyed his family. Facing a choice between the love of his life and the fate of the universe, he endeavors to prevent a terrible future. Now, I don't know how much you remember when the first one came out, our sort of discussions about it, but I was very mixed on the first film. It wasn't until I rewatched it that I sort of appreciated what it was doing, and I rewatched it right before I went and saw Part 2 in theaters, and I was like, okay, I now see what he's doing here. And I think the second one works even better for me because of the supporting performances, specifically Javier Bardem and Rebecca Ferguson, showing these two different sides of religious fanaticism. And while I still don't think Part 1 is perfect, you kind of need it to get all that exposition out of the way before you can get to Part 2, which has some really juicy stuff. And much like my complaint about Part 1 ending on a non-complete story. Part 2 also ends on a non-complete story, which is frustrating, but I now sort of see what he's doing, and I'm believing in his vision, that I'm sort of very excited to see what he does with Dune Messiah.
Sorry. So you said you after you rewatched Dune 1, then you appreciate it. That was like before you watched Dune 2 though, right? Like you
Yeah, it was
reappreciated
right
it.
before. It was like the week before, yeah.
Yeah. You're right. Like I think that the type of world Dune is, and I mean that comes from the book, you do need a lot of setup. You need to
Mm-hmm.
build the world in a rather laborious way that perhaps we don't most movies I think these days don't really aren't afforded that luxury of being able to have a whole movie just to set up a world. And then you're right, like the second film, we're finished the first book now, but like we're still not done the story. We're still not done Paul's story.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad that you have come around on Dune Part 1 because it is a
Yeah.
great movie. It is a great film.
I also think it has some of the most breathtaking shots I saw
Yeah.
last year in film,
Yes.
or really in ever. Like there's a shot early in the movie when Paul and his mother are hiding in the desert,
Yes.
and you see these like the enemy jumping from the ships, and they've got these like low gravity suits on, so they're like slowly gliding down or then jumping up a tall cliff, and it just like was absolutely stunning. Yeah, it was like, how did they do this? I don't know. And then the other,
Sorry, I was gonna say seeing that scene of them coming up the cliff,
yeah,
that was
takes your
it
breath away. Yeah.
blew my mind. Like absolutely blew my mind.
And then I would say everything that they did on the Harkonnen planet with this sort of
Mhm.
like infrared camera, and then color reversed it so it was black and white, was mind-blowingly stunning, and it proved that big budget blockbuster films still have it within them to take creative risks, and that was something unique and bold that I've never seen anything like that.
And yet Denis did not get nominated for Best Director. Like
I know.
why do they hate him so much? I don't
I know.
understand. I don't get it. He is my favorite director working right now, but I don't understand why. And I know awards are not everything. The Academy is not the be all and end all, but it is infuriating that he does not get that kind of respect from his peers effectively that
Hmm.
that God, like other directors do who shouldn't be there. But that's neither here nor there. That's an Oscars
Yeah.
episode that I purposely move away from.
As you always did, yes. All right, what is your number 8 film?
My number 8 is A Different Man. It is directed by Aaron Schimberg. It is one of two films Sebastian Stan came out with. No, he came out with more than two. I think he came out with more than two last year, but the one of two that he was nominated for and got a lot of awards talk. It is about a man struggling with neurofibromatosis, which causes a disfiguring of his face. And an actor, Adam Pearson, who does have this ailment, he's also in the film as well. It's one of these movies I kind of don't want to describe too much of the plot because I just think it's a really interesting one to watch and to go through. I suppose this sounds really pretentious, but like the journey that Sebastian Stan's character goes on, because it's a vibe movie, but the vibes aren't necessarily great all the time.
Yep.
But it's such an interesting film, and Renata Rensive, I think is her surname, who was in Worst Person in the World a few years ago. She's in this as well, and she's tremendous. It's another one of those movies. I watched it, I sat back, and I went, "Wow, that's just an incredible story, incredible performances." It came out of nowhere for me too. It was one of these movies that didn't have too much hype built around it going into it, and then I'm glad that it did get the awards buzz, the kind of the critical acclaim that it got, because I do think it's an incredible movie.
Yeah, I put Sebastian Stan's performance in this as my best male lead
Hmm.
performance of the year in our If We Were Oscar Voters blog post that we did this year. I absolutely adored his performance. I don't think this movie completely worked for me. It gets really bonkers,
Yeah.
especially in the final act, in a way that I think just derails it too much. But that said, there's so much interesting stuff going on in here that I highly recommend anyone that was curious about to definitely watch it, because it is so good and touches on some really interesting themes of like self-loathing
Mm-hmm.
and the way you view yourself and the way you present yourself to the world. Tons of fascinating stuff. And like by the time we meet the Adam Pearson character, and like by the end of the movie, we're like, man, we really hate this guy. You know, the guy that Sebastian Stan wishes he could be, but he can't.
It's yeah, you like you said, you nailed it. It hits on so many different things of different insecurities that I think everybody has. They're
Mm-hmm.
universal insecurities that we all have, and it does it in such an interesting, kind of almost in a very extreme way. But at the same time, I say extreme, but people do go through that, right? Like people do go through these things, and in an age where plastic surgery is so accessible, more accessible to the average person than it ever was. I feel like this movie, and also like with social media putting image and um, creating insecurities for people, I feel like this movie sits really, really nicely in kind of the zeitgeist of everything that's going on now. But I also love like that Sebastian Stan is getting this. I don't want to say renaissance, because I don't think it's renaissance at all. I think it's a continuation of what he began, being like his Gossip Girl days. But it's
Mm-hmm.
just like I often compare him to Chris Evans, which might not be fair, but the two of them, they had their Captain America thing, and then Chris Evans went one way, and I think Sebastian Stan has shown he has a really good agent who picks like they pick really interesting work to do, and I think he's going to be one of like the great actors that we see going into the next few decades. And he doesn't choose the obvious things ever. He chooses the things that
Yeah.
are, I think, really challenging, things that, I mean, people might not like him because of it. Case in point, The Apprentice. But I really respect him as an actor. I think that he's incredible, and it's nice to see him doing roles like this, because I think they really challenge him and they really kind of stretch him out.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and it's so shocking because I wouldn't have predicted him to be the
Yeah, right.
maybe the best actor to come out of the sort of post Avengers
Yeah.
acting credits. You know, obviously there were people who had better careers before
The
all
one
that
like the
sort of
of
stuff.
the ones who weren't that established going into
Yeah,
Avengers. Like I agree. He was, because he was so quiet in those ones
yeah,
too. Like he was a supporting character, which probably went to his benefit truly in
hmm,
all those, because we don't look at him and just think Bucky. Whereas I think now when people look at Chris Evans, they do still just see Cap. When they look at Hemsworth, they see Thor.
yeah,
But I'll say Sebastian Stan's a better actor than them. So what are you gonna do?
yeah.
Yeah.
And like maybe it helped because he was playing a sort of morally ambiguous character
Yes.
where
True.
he didn't have this sort of veneer sheen of I have to be the good guy to maintain my image,
Very
which,
true.
you know, so many big actors fall into that trap of, and
Chris
nothing
Evans.
annoys me more.
Chris
Yeah.
Evans for sure. I think he does. And a lot of people, whenever I say that, I'm like, Chris Evans always does the good guy role. He very rarely plays a slime bag, and they go, "Well, what about Knives Out?" I go, "Yeah, but it's still
There's one
like
movie. Yeah.
but it's one movie, but I'm also like, but he's still like the douchey good looking, like, like
Hmm.
it's not I don't know him, but I'm not saying he's a douchebag, but it's like it's not that far away from some good-looking kid who grew up in Boston. Like it's just it I think Sebastian Stan has done something really interesting with his career, but then he had to have had a base to do that with, right? Like if he
Hmm.
wasn't talented, he wouldn't be able to do what he's doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's definitely going to be very interesting to sort of see how he follows up this 1-2 punch of The Apprentice and A Different Man in the coming years.
I wonder what he does. He have anything announced for upcoming
I don't know. I
films?
haven't looked.
I love
Yeah.
it. I love a movie he did called Fresh a few years ago. That was
I need to watch that one. Yeah, yeah.
very,
I know a
very
lot of people
good.
love that one.
Very, very good movie. Oh, he's in
All right.
Thunderbolts coming up. That's
Oh yeah,
that's the
yeah, yeah,
thing. Yeah.
yeah. Oh well. Well, my number 8 film is a Canadian film called The King Tide, directed by Christian Sparks. After the mayor of an idyllic island village discovers a child with mysterious powers awash on their shores, the once peaceful community devolves into civil war, torn over the belief that the child is the next savior. So the plot description of this kind of sounds a little weird and maybe a little too over the top. But I was very much won over by the like how best to describe this sort of magical realism that was going on in this world, done in a very subtle and believable way, with just enough like darkness hiding behind the surface, that I was fully on board with everything that they're doing. I believe it takes place somewhere in Newfoundland, on a small island off of Newfoundland. So it's this isolated community, and it's this young girl who they find her as a baby, kind of like this type of Moses type of thing, and she has the power to heal people. So the guy that finds her has like a huge cut across his chest. It starts healing instantly. Her grandmother, the adopted grandmother, has Alzheimer's. She gets better. They'll bring her out to go fishing, and she'll stick her hand in the water, and all the fish will come swimming towards her. There's all this like great little touches of building this world, and it's the type of movie that like soon as you understand that the conceit is no one outside of this island knows about her, you know that that's what the conflict is going to be, is how do they continue to hide her existence, especially as she's like 10, 12 years old, whatever it is. She's going to get older. She's already starting to ask questions, things like that. And then once that sort of comes into play of people learning about that there might be something interesting going on this island, that's when the tension really ramps up. And I really like this. This was a great little sort of like almost like a folk horror movie to me.
So this movie didn't really work for me as well. I will say they very kindly brought me out to Newfoundland for the press for this film, and so I'd feel terrible saying that I didn't really like it, but it just like I love the premise of it. I think the idea of it is really cool. The implications of this girl's ability, kind of what I don't know how we want to call it, like superpower, however we want to say it. I think is such an interesting, and they do explore it a bit in the film, but overall it just, I don't know, it just didn't quite work for me in the way that I really wanted it to, because I think that it's a pretty amazing concept, and I love the look of the movie. I think it's really cool. Like Newfoundland is such a unique place in the world, let alone Canada, that I think they show that off really nicely. I know Matthew Simpson, he really likes this movie too. It just didn't do it for me though. Just didn't quite work for me.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. I know, other than Matthew, I don't know anyone else that like really went for this film. So I know I'm on a bit of an island, so to speak. But yeah, it sort of looks like the Banshees of Inisherin. Like it's shot in a very similar way.
Which, I mean, makes sense because there is a lot of like Irish connections. Yeah, I was gonna say, there's a lot of Irish connections between the two areas. So I'm super fascinated by, like, after I'd never been to Newfoundland before, so having gone there, and we had terrible weather while we were there, which was kind of apropos for the film itself. But it's such a unique part of Canada, and one that I would love to like explore more. And I become a bit fascinated with the films that come out of there and the talent that comes out of there. Like Mark O'Brien he's from Newfoundland, and he's made like The Righteous was such an interesting film to come out of there too. And they film Rex and Hudson over there. Hudson and Rex, sorry.
Hudson and Rex,
out over there. And I love that show. That was great. But Rex died recently. I'm just gonna put that out there. I know. That's a side tangent. That's just about Newfoundland. But anyways, yeah, it is. I think I respect the movie more than I actually liked it, though.
Hey everyone, my name is Jeff Bulmer. I'm one half of the podcast Classic Movies Live, and I am here today to talk about one of my favorite movies of 2024, Paying for It. Paying for It is directed by Soo-Kyun Lee from the graphic novel of the same name by Chester Brown, which is a memoir of his time in the late 90s and early 2000s as he begins to explore the world of paying for sex workers after Chester Brown and Soo-Kyun Lee opened up their relationship. What I think is most interesting about this is that this is a story that Soo-Kyun Lee was directly involved in. It's her story almost as much as it is Chester's. And while she doesn't feature much in the graphic novel, directing the film gives her a venue to sort of reflect on this time in her life as well. So the movie ends up functioning as sort of a dual memoir. Beyond that, this movie is a really great unconventional love story. I mean, maybe not even a love story. I think what this movie does so well is it sort of presents an alternative perspective on what romance can be, what relationships can be. And I think that just really makes this a very special movie. So if paying for it is in theaters anywhere near you, you should see it right away. Or if you're listening to this in the future and you can rent it, do that. It's very worth whatever you'll pay for it.
All right, Rachel, well, what is your number 7 film?
Number 7, I'm going to Japan for a film called All the Long Nights. I saw this at the Toronto Japanese Film Festival last year, and it was one of these movies that just kind of like hit me, and I didn't know how to write about it. And I feel terrible because like I know they were hoping for a review to come out, but I couldn't write about it. Like it took me in such a way that I was almost like I was literally lost for words by it. But it's a film that's directed by Miyake Sho, and it stars 2 young people. So it starts with a young woman who deals with like really severe period pain, and it causes her to not be able to really function properly because the pain is a lot, but also the emotional swings that you get heading into your period or during your period were really intense for her. And she always felt like such an outsider, like she just couldn't hold down a job, all these things. And then she meets a young man who obviously isn't dealing with the same thing, but he has a lot of social anxieties on his own, and he doesn't really know how to fit into a work environment either. And it's this really beautiful story of 2 people who are really antisocial, but yet kind of come together and want to be social together, but don't really know how to. And I just found it to be a really refreshing take on people who don't necessarily fit into the very quite strict confines that we have across the world in terms of like the developed world society. But I think in Japan, it's especially pronounced. And 2 people who just don't fit into that. And they're trying to figure out their way. And the 2 of them luckily found each other. But with that comes a lot of, very lighthearted moments, very intense moments. But it's such a touching film. It's a really, really touching movie. I wish I knew how people could go to watch it. I don't know how you can watch it, but you'll find a way, because I think it's just a really beautiful film that just, really, really, I found it really touching last year.
Nice. Yeah, this is one that I didn't know. I did cover the Toronto Japanese Film Festival last year. It's a great little festival.
Yeah.
But it's so hard for me to pick out which movies I want to see because you basically really know nothing about these films other than like the one sentence line. You're like, I guess I'm in the mood for this kind of movie. Don't know what it's going to be like. So it is a little bit tough. That's my one criticism, is like it's tough to know what's up my alley, what's good, things like that. There isn't much indication.
What I did was I asked the publicist. I just said, is there anything that you think is particularly worth watching? That was it. And
damn it, that's smart.
Yeah, I just said like what, and you kind of ask them on like a personal level too, like outside of your job as a publicist.
Yeah.
What did you watch that you thought was interesting? I think that's a good place to start,
smart.
because you're right. It's hard. It's really, really difficult. And especially because, we don't live in Japan. And as much as we love Japanese film and we go into it as much as we can, we're not really on top of who the top directors are, who are like, or sorry, I shouldn't say the top. I think the top directors, they bleed over into Canada, but the let's call them mid-range directors, the ones who are really good, have a really good reputation. Same with the actors. We don't really know how to spot that. Whereas here, it's like somebody like a Sebastian Stan, for example. We were just talking about him. It's like we see his name and we go, oh, we should watch that because that would be interesting. Or Jeff Nichols. We go, that's interesting. Let's watch that. And we don't really have that same ability with Japanese film. So I think that's why those festivals are really good, though, because we get a little bit of access to those movies.
Yeah, because I love TJFF, but like they're not getting Hirokazu Koreeda films or Miyazaki films,
which is good in a way. It's great. Like, yes. I think it's great that they don't get those movies.
Like we know those. Those movies are getting distribution over here, and that festival specializes in giving films distribution or showing them in Canada when otherwise they would not be distributed over here. And so like a lot of the times you'll be seeing movies in the festivals that came out in Japan like 2 years earlier, but they just never got worldwide distribution.
Yeah. And the thing I like about that festival in particular is I get the vibe that they are a festival that is catered towards the Japanese community in Toronto, like the diaspora in Toronto, the people
Mm-hmm.
who, they want to watch these films and they want to have an ability, like maybe they heard from friends or family back home about these movies or just through the news, right? Like
Yeah.
that this cool thing came out. But they don't really have a way to watch it in Canada, especially on a bigger screen. Like you probably can figure out a way, as we all do for films. But to be able to watch it on a bigger screen, I don't want to say movie theater, it's not a movie theater, but like a bigger screen to be able to do that is quite special. And I think that that's the
Mm-hmm.
way that they direct the film. And then the rest of us kind of pile in and just, if you have an interest in Japanese film, you go and watch it. And it's a great festival. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right, my number 7 film is another international film, and that is the Irish film Kneecap,
Mm.
directed by Rich Pepiat. When fate brings Belfast teacher JJ into the orbit of self-confessed low-life scum, Noisha and Liam, the needle drops on a hip-hop act like no other. Rapping in their native Irish, they lead a movement to save their mother tongue. This was a movie that like I kind of been hearing buzz about, and when it was shortlisted for Best International Film and for Best Original Song, I was like, I'm gonna check this out. This one kind of sounds fun, and I was not prepared for what a wild ride this film was. This movie is absolutely bonkers, and like you finish this movie and I know, like it's St. Patrick's Day as we're recording this. We're around that time. It's tomorrow, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, we're Irish for a day." Oh, watching this movie, you're like, "No, I want to be Irish. I want to learn the language." This movie is so hilarious and fun and innovative. The way they shoot things, the way they'll have like captions come up on screen, the type of humor, like yeah, it's a lot of excess. A lot of this movie is about doing drugs, specifically ketamine. So if you're not in that vibe, that mindset, you're probably going to find it a little grating and a little too over the top. But I loved it, and the music really spoke to me. They're playing in Vancouver this fall, and I really want to go and see them because I was like, this was the most fun I've ever had in a movie in a long time. Were you able to see this one?
I was, yeah. I really like this one too. Was fascinated
Nice.
by it because uh it primarily is in Irish, like enough so
Mhm.
that it could have been it was shortlisted, like you said, in that it was eligible for that category. um I think it's really interesting in Ireland, the push that there seems to be to have more films, more bits of television done in the Irish language, because
Yeah.
it is a language that was effectively stolen from them and taken from them, but yet there are still, like, there were enough remnants of it that they're trying to build it up. And kind of like we are saying for the Seed of the Sacred Fig, it's like it's the younger generation that is taking an interest in it, that they have to. If they don't take an interest in it, and then it kind of goes away
Hmm.
eventually. um and I
And
like,
this makes it cool.
exactly, I was going to say, the
Yeah.
thing I like about this film is that it doesn't just put the Irish language in a way of like an old-timey way. Like it makes it very modern, very youthful, very interesting. Because you kind of think about when we learned French, and that's not the same. I know it's not, it's
Hmm.
completely not the same. Or I could say, like, growing up, I had to go to Chinese school on Saturdays, and it is
Yeah.
such a drag to do that when you're
Yeah.
young. When you're young, it is the biggest imposition to your life that you possibly think there could be. When you get older, though, you appreciate it and you wish you took it more seriously. You wish you had a greater investment into it. And so I think in Ireland, for there to be a film like this to interest a younger generation, to maybe go back and be like, oh, those classes we took in secondary or primary, like we're now interested enough, like we want to take it more seriously, and they're still young enough that
Hmm.
they can do it. So I think there's a really cool kind of push happening in Ireland right now, for more movies that are in Irish. And yeah, this one is very funny. It's very kind of Irish humor as well. And
Hmm.
I'm with you. This was one of my honorable mentions. Like I was saying, number 10 is a hard spot to fill. This was one of the ones that I was like, oh, this could be a number 10 movie for me, because
Hmm.
I really loved it as well.
Yeah, and like it feels so like anti-colonialism, and like I
Hmm.
know we don't often think of Ireland as that way, but like that's what their whole history
Yep.
is being oppressed by the English, and this kind of felt like a nice middle finger to polite English society, which in turn is sort of the way colonialism works, we feel that in Canada, you feel that in the United States, you feel that reach around the world. And this kind of just felt was like, this is a little cheeky fu to them, and I like that. There's this whole subplot about how the BBC won't play their song because it's anti-British, and it's like, in this day and age, really, you're worried about that? And so it's interesting. And I will say, it's about these three guys in this group, and the two of them who are the rappers, they do a fairly good job basically playing a version of themselves on screen. But I was blown away by the guy that plays the DJ of the group, JJ, otherwise known as DJ Provi. If you would have told me afterwards that was an actor that they hired to play this guy, I would have believed you. He was so good. Like, he has a career in acting. He was that good.
I was actually impressed with all three of them. Like, I know you said you thought the two young guys did a good job too, but it's like, I was sure by the end of the film, when like those montages with like real life stock images and photos and video come up, I was sure it was going to be three different people. I was shocked that it was those three. I was like, whoa, like that. I'm super impressed to be able to do that. And you're right, like they are playing a version of themselves, but in a way I think that's harder. Like, it's hard to pretend to be yourself and on a movie, and I think that all three of them did just an incredible job. But I agree with you. I think he probably was the biggest standout, that he was so natural, so incredibly charismatic in front of the camera.
And like, this movie has an air of what's the word I'm looking for here? The fact that they managed to have Michael Fassbender in here adds a bit of like credibility to it, of like, oh, this isn't just some like silly little movie. No, we got a serious actor in here as well, and he does a great job playing the father of one of the young rappers as a sort of like Irish freedom fighter, and what that legacy means to his family of always trying to live up to him.
I also think sometimes people forget that Fassbender is like, he can speak Irish. Like, he has been a big proponent of the Irish language. And I think with the influx of Irish actors that have been really, really making a name for themselves in the last few years in particular, it's really cool to see that like somebody like a Fassbender take an interest in this, because movies like Kneecap are not just entertaining movies. Like, they mean a lot. They mean so much more than just being something that's interesting on screen. And I love, like you said, I love that Fassbender is in it, because it does lend like a gravitas to the film, and I think it makes people interested too. Like, I don't know how many people would have been interested without Fassbender's name attached to it, and he knows that too, right? Like, he knows that his name is going to help them get the movie greenlit. His name is going to help producers come along and distributors be interested in it. So hats off to Fassbender for doing that, especially because he kind of took some time off acting, and so it's like, for him to come back and do that, it's good on him.
All right, well, what is your number 6 film, Rachel?
My number 6 is one that we just talked about, which is Dune Part 2, one of our overlaps. Like I said, I mean, Denis Villeneuve, is my favorite director working today. One of my all-time favorite directors of all time. I just said that twice. I was a huge fan of Dune Part 1, because I think I knew like they weren't really going to get into the crux of what Dune is and the actual story that Frank Herbert had written. And so I didn't really hold it against Part 1 that it was going to be anything other than building the world. And I thought that they did it really well. And then bringing Part 2 into it, it's like they took the world that they created in Part 1 and then really just took off, right? Like, they just kind of hit the ground running in Part 2. I mean, you said it, the visuals in this movie are absolutely incredible. The performances are really, really good. And one thing that I found really interesting about this movie is you have some of the top talent of the newer generation. I don't want to call them new because like they've all been around for a little while now, but like you got Chalamet, Zendaya, Austin Butler, Florence Pugh. And it's like, I think one day, because those guys seem to be the group that are going to like rule Hollywood eventually, and they're going to be the elite that we now associate with like the Merrills and the Denzels and the De Niros and Pacinos. Like, they're going to be the ones who inherit all that. And I think that we're going to look back at this movie and be like, isn't it wild that they were all in this movie? Kind of like The Outsiders, how we look at that, we're like, isn't it crazy how much talent was in that movie. And I think Dune Part 2 is going to be like that. And Denise says that in an interview too. I was looking up this movie not too long ago for something else, and I didn't realize Denis Villeneuve in an interview, he marked that as well. Like, he clocked it as being, this is new Hollywood. And I don't know if he purposely intended to do it that way. Probably not. But I think it's such a wonderful kind of point in film history, I think, for what's to come from those actors in particular. I can't wait for Part 3 or Messiah. I don't know how they're going to call it, but I think I love a lot of Denis movies in the smaller ones. Like, I think those are probably his best work. I think his French Canadian films are probably still the best things that he's done. But these are the films that will end up being like the crown jewel next to his name. And I think for really good reason.
Yeah. I already said my part. Completely agree. And I think you're right. I think a big thing to highlight is this idea of this fantastic ensemble cast that, like, you maybe get one of these every 7 to 10 years, where you look back a couple years later and you end up getting, multiple Oscar nominees or winners, or the biggest box office actors in the year, like in the planet, sort of thing. And, I think of something like, you mentioned The Outsiders. I think it's something like Scott Pilgrim as well, where you look back, you're like, how did you get all of those people at that time? And for Dune, I think it's the same thing, where I think it helps that it is such a big budget film, so they can afford, like, hey, Austin Butler, you're not going to be the lead, but it's still going to be a juicy role, and you're still going to get your money. It's not like you're going to be slumming it. So it's pretty cool in that way that we're getting to see this, that so many people want to be a part of it and are willing to play an ensemble role, which is something that I feel like is often lost on a lot of actors. I'm like, man, you should do more ensemble movies. It's so much fun when you get a good ensemble like this.
I think, we talked about it a little bit in the Oscars article that we did, where we're like, how come the ensemble, they don't get really nominated for Oscars? And it's like, because they do cancel each other out. And I do think a lot of actors, and probably more so their agents, are the ones who are like, maybe you shouldn't do it, because you're not going to get, like Chalamet, you're not going to get that much attention for acting. But A Complete Unknown, because that's you will get a good amount of attention. So but to see, these actors,
but like these are the movies that we're talking about 20, 30 years later.
100%. And but I think for a lot of these actors, not just the younger generation, but like the Charlotte Ramplings, the Stellan Skarsgård, like to work with Denis, I think is quite, I don't want to say an achievement for these actors, but something that they want, right? Like, he's a director that actors want to work with. And it's very obvious why that is. And I also want to say Dave Bautista. I'll take a moment to talk about Dave Bautista. I didn't know him from wrestling. Like, I obviously knew who The Rock was. I grew up watching him. John Cena, I knew who he was. I had no idea who Dave Bautista was. I'm so impressed with the way that he has navigated his movie career, like doing these films. The fact that Denis effectively endorsed him to be like, yeah, no, you are, like, you can do this. And then I saw him in The Last Showgirl. Like, he's just incredible. And I'm so interested to see how he does later on, because I think this is him being a part of Dune is what made me interested in him as an actor. Because before then I kind of just thought, oh, he's just doing kind of like what The Rock and John Cena have done. But I think that he's gone a completely different way. And I think that that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And I hope he continues to choose good projects, because I feel like, he's 2 bad years away from only being in schlock. Like, he still does some of these like direct-to-video stuff every once in a while. Like, oh, Dave Bautista was in this? Okay. But like, as long as he keeps, booking parts like in Blade Runner 2049 or in Dune or in The Last Showgirl or things like that, which show off his range.
The Last Showgirl, I was so impressed that he wanted to be in it. Like, I was just impressed that he wanted to be in a film like that. I thought, and he's really good in it too. He's very, very, very good in that movie.
Well, that's a very calculated career move,
100%.
where it's like, I need to attach myself into a low budget movie where I'm not going to make any money. It probably cost him more to lose all that weight than it did for him to be what he earned in that movie.
Yeah, it's true.
But it's worth it in the long run for his career.
I think so. 100%. I agree with that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And he's always seemed like very smart, both of what he brings to the table and clearly surrounding himself with smart people, being like, look, you could do a million Guardians movies and things like that, where, you're basically playing a version of The Rock or stuff like that, or Arnold. But like, how far is that really going to get you if you want to be, creatively expressive?
The fact that he wants that, though, like, I think there was a
Yeah.
a path laid out for him that The Rock laid out of saying, and then, like you said, Arnold before The Rock, of
Hmm.
saying, like, you can do these, like, comedic roles. You could do these, the superhero thing. And he has done all those things too. But the fact that he decided to go a different way, I find it fascinating. And it
Hmm.
seems now, because like they announced what The Rock is doing a film with Scorsese. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Hopefully.
I have an eyebrow raised to it.
Not,
Coincidentally. See? See how that
yes. The
works?
people's eyebrow.
But
Yeah.
it's interesting. I'll say it's interesting. It's interesting that that's happening, but we'll see how that goes.
All right, my number 6 film is one movie called Challengers from Luca Guadagnino. Tashi, a former tennis prodigy turned coach, transformed her husband into a champion, but to overcome a recent losing streak and redeem herself, he'll need to face off against his former best friend and Tashi's ex-boyfriend. This was a movie that, like, I felt like all the hype it was getting when it came out early last year. I was like, I'm not going to watch this.
What a hipster. What a hipster.
Yeah. Boy, was I dumb. This movie friggin' rocks. And I gotta stop doubting Guadagnino. While I didn't care for Queer as much, I know a lot of people are a big fan of it. I overall was not. But Challengers, holy cow. Like, I just love the effortless genre switching that Luca can do between stuff like Bones and All, which is one of the most unsettling movies I've ever watched, and Challengers, or Call Me By Your Name. Like, his breadth is wild to me, and so I really appreciate it. And I loved all 3 performers in this. Zendaya, Mike Feist, and Josh O'Connor were all great. And this is obviously the Zendaya show, but I think it's a great coming out vehicle for Feist and O'Connor, who, I love Feist in West Side Story as Raph. I thought he was the best part in that film. And Josh O'Connor in La Chimera, I thought he was excellent in a movie that I was sort of mixed on, but I thought he was great in it. And this all comes together in just a amazing display of cinematography and editing and score and just this propulsive nature of this film. And yeah, it is sexy, but I love that it's sexy in a way that, like, you don't need to see everything for it to still be sexy. It's the tension in between the moments that makes this film sexy. And so I really like that about that. And so, like, it's got so much good stuff going on. And the fact that it's essentially a 3-hander, and almost no one else of note is in this, is very impressive.
I think it's funny that Feist and O'Connor both played journalists in other films this year. Like, he was in Bikeriders. Feist was in Bikeriders as the journalist.
Yes.
I thought that was really funny to me that happened.
Who did Josh O'Connor play?
In La Chimera, he had like a kind of a reportery type role, right? Like,
sort
of.
Yes.
Yeah, I just thought it was really funny that they had that. Yeah, I didn't really like Challengers. I would go as far as say that I genuinely didn't like it. Like, I get it. I understand why people like it so much. And I'm glad people like it so much, but it wasn't a movie to me that was at all remarkable. I don't know. I didn't really care. I really liked Queer. Like, we're talking about like Lucas films. I don't know. I struggle with his movies sometimes. I didn't like Bones and All. I didn't think that was as kind of, it didn't really unsettle me more. It kind of bored me a little bit. Challengers, I was just like, I felt like Challengers, I'm like, you could see the seams of it. I'm like, I get what you're doing. I get what all of this is. It's just, I don't know. It just didn't really work for me. And I felt like I was missing out on that, and Wicked were the 2 movies that I'm like, I really feel like I'm missing something here because people love these movies. And I would really go as far as say, like, I do not like them at all. It's not even to say, oh, it didn't work for me, but I think they're good movies. I just didn't like them. But I thought, yeah, it was interesting. I don't know. Good use of my time. I don't know. I try to make something positive to say about every film.
Okay.
Don't really have one for this one. It's fine. I'm glad you liked it.
Wow. Certified hater.
Yeah, I know. I have no joy. I think that's what it is. There's no joy.
Hi, this is Brian Loomis with the What a Picture podcast, talking about my favorite movie from last year, which was Evil Does Not Exist, the Ryusuke Hamaguchi film. This movie, Hamaguchi is a director that I had liked before. This movie sort of catapulted him to the top of my list of directors to watch and made me really excited to see what the rest of his career looks like. It does something that his movies to this point, including Drive My Car, really hadn't done as much for me, which was display sort of this visual first sensibility. He'd always been strong at dialogue, at crafting long scenes of dialogue that told you a lot about characters, about the world, but this movie is really first about the visuals, the sense of place. It also does play to his strengths of those long scenes of dialogue. You get this extended scene at a permitting hearing, and having gone to a lot of permitting hearings for work, I can tell you that that's exactly what those dynamics are like often. And just really beautiful, inventive, gorgeous film that I would recommend to anyone who's looking for something to check out.
All right, Rachel, what is your number 5 film?
Like I said, to me, the top 5 is very easy to put together. Like, it kind of came together really easy for me. When I'm like picking the movies. And Any Other Way, the Jackie Shane story, is a documentary, Canadian documentary about a singer, Jackie Shane, who was very prominent in the 60s in the Toronto music scene, but also in the Montreal music scene. And then just kind of became a recluse and went through a lot in her career. Throughout her career, people didn't quite know what to make of her. Was she transgender? Was she a gay man? There was a lot of questions, and she never confirmed this, that, or the other. And it wasn't really until the later years of her life that she was kind of came out of, I don't want to say confinement, that sounds really intense, but kind of came into the public spotlight a little more. She did an interview at the CBC, which put her back on the radar for a lot of people, saying, who is this woman? Where did she come from? This artistry. Her music is incredible. I found the film so fascinating, of one, somebody who is clearly so important to Toronto. And Toronto is really good about pushing Toronto things. So like when something is from Toronto, you never hear the end of it. I never heard of Jackie Shane, and I'm not that plugged into the music scene, so I was like, maybe it's just me. But then it turns out, no, it's kind of almost by her design that she didn't, not that she wanted to be forgotten, but I think that she just didn't want so much press on her for a variety of reasons. I think this movie, it's directed by Michael Mabbitt and Luca Rosenberg-Lee. I think they had such a unique challenge ahead of them doing this film, where there are photos and videos that exist. Obviously, Jackie Shane's music exists, but not that much. And given the time period where there is more television, there is more photography, like it creates this way of, how do you tell the story of somebody without them around, and without not as much footage as majority of artists. Like, there was a documentary I watched a couple years ago about Little Richard, and obviously there's endless footage of Little Richard available to tell his story, but Jackie Shane there isn't. And the way that they did it with rotoscope and kind of the editing that they did to put together a narrative, I thought was so impressive. I was really blown away by this movie, and just thought it was an incredible story about somebody in Toronto who is very important to the culture and helped to develop Toronto music and Toronto culture in general, has been very largely forgotten. And I think that it's great that this movie exists so that we don't forget her.
Yeah. No, this is a movie I quite liked as well. One of my favorite Canadian releases from last year. Very powerful film. I had a cursory knowledge of Jackie Shane through a friend who liked her music, and so I was aware of the name, but I hadn't really heard her stuff before. And yeah, I thought, yeah, you're right. The way they sort of use the rotoscope animation to show these phone calls that they had recorded was a really inventive way to capture a moment that was not actually filmed. And that's sort of something that documentaries are always struggling. How do we do this, with reenactments, with different ways, whether it's using pictures or stuff like that. And there's a lot of similar ways to do it, but it's sort of in the end about the execution, how does it fit in with the rest of the overall story, it works because it has this very artful and playful design that matched her music in this very beautiful, touching way that I think did her a great service to help reestablish her legacy.
Yeah, I think it's like everything that you said about the film. I think it's a really wonderful piece of work that I wasn't expecting kind of to come out of the documentary space, especially within Canada, or like a story that could be told in such an interesting way. But also, I think at the end of the day, though, if just listen to her music, because it's absolutely incredible. It's all on Spotify too. It's really, really great.
Yeah, she doesn't have a big catalog, only I think a couple albums, but yeah, everything that I've heard is fantastic.
Yeah, it's really incredible, and her story, and there's actually a good amount of like her interviews on CBC and things like that. That's all available for public consumption, and would highly recommend it.
Nice. All right, well, I'm going to go on with my number 5 film, and that is Dìdi from Sean Wang. And this is about in 2008, during the last month of summer before high school begins, an impressionable 13-year-old Taiwanese-American boy learns what his family can't teach him: how to skate, how to flirt, and how to love your mom. This was sort of like the big breakout Sundance film from last year, I believe. I saw it during the Seattle International Film Festival last year. And yeah, this movie really knocked me on my socks, and I think a lot of people expected it to be a bit of an awards player at the end of the year, especially for Joan Chen, who's a legendary actor, and having this really sort of juicy part as this immigrant mother who is trying to connect with her son and maintain the old traditional values that she was raised on while adopting the American values that her kids are living in, and all this sort of stuff. And it also sort of feels like it's the first movie we've gotten that sort of is highlighting this era of growing up, of coming of age stories, where like, we've got the stuff from the 2000s and the 90s and all that sort of stuff. But like 2008, I was just starting college, so I'm definitely older than he was. But all this stuff of like, YouTube being new and MSN and things like that, like, yeah, I might have been 6 or 7 years older than him, but like, still, those were my memories too. And it felt like I was sort of seeing a version of myself and my friends on screen. And this era right before everyone had a smartphone, and all your information was on the web with social media and things like that. And so you're sort of creating the first version of yourself online. And I think that Isaac Wang, who plays the lead character, Chris Wang, lots of Wangs in this, I thought he did such a good job. And, I was really impressed by his performance. And yeah, Joan Chen is incredible. And I love the dynamic between the brother and the sister. I thought they were great. A really believable sibling rivalry that, like, you're like, okay, you can only be up against each other's throats for so long, and then by the end of it, they kind of make up, and like, you see how much of an impact she had on her little brother, and you're like, this is the sort of heartfelt tenderness that I needed from this film.
The only reason this movie didn't make it for me, I really loved it too, and I agree with you. I kind of wish Joan Chen had gotten a bit more hype towards the end, because I think they did push for her. I don't know. I guess were there too many other good performances? I don't know. But the reason this movie, I don't want to say it didn't work for me. It did work for me. It is one of the most unpleasant films that I have seen in a long time, in that it's a tough watch because the character of Chris is so grating and such a terrible human being. And I think he brings up like a lot of kind of a reminder of like our worst behaviors at that age. And it's just one of those, like, especially for a top 10 like this, like, these are your favorites, right? So it's like, this is not a movie that I've ever wanted to revisit. This is not a movie that I think about too much either, because it is just so, and in a way, I think that just speaks to how good the movie is, because I think that was the intention, was to make it uncomfortable, was to make it unsettling. And yeah, they did that. He did that very, very well. But for me, that's the only reason that I would say it's not on my top 10, but it would get an honorable mention for me. It's just deeply uncomfortable, and I think unpleasant is the best word I can say. It's not a comfortable, it's not like a happy watch. There are no good vibes on this movie to watch it. Just like it's like a chill movie to watch at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, it definitely is a very high strung movie at times, where you sort of see the bad decisions he's making before he realizes that they're bad decisions, where you and I live those bad decisions. We're like, no, this isn't going to go well for you. And then, of course, he goes through with whatever it was he was doing. And you're like, okay, now you're going to have to understand what the consequences were. And I think it was just such a refreshingly honest take of coming of age. Yeah. And I really appreciated that.
I agree. I completely agree with all that. I think it's especially for that genre where there always seems to be like such a tidy bow attached to it. And then like bad behavior is bad behavior, but it's never that bad. It's never as bad as a lot of us probably were when we were that young, or at least maybe we weren't that bad, but like the impact, like what the effect of our behavior was probably that bad, was probably that hurtful. And it's interesting watching it as an adult now and feeling really bad about it. I think that's where it comes
it's
from.
Also, and also sort of, I don't know, I don't want to say if it suffers, but using period appropriate language, and we might not think that language has changed that much, but you know,
but it has,
some of the
I don't understand what a lot of people say online anymore, so it has changed.
It has, but like some of the casual slurs and insults and things like that they throw around, and like right now it's a little jarring to hear, but I'm like, no, that's like
what we
kids
said.
sounded like back
terrible,
then.
Isn't it? It's terrible. But hey, you know what? In 20 years' time, when they make a movie about this time period, I'm sure there's going to be a ton of things that people go, seriously, did we say that, or did they say that?
100%.
And that's just it's progression of society. Hopefully, progression, anyways, forward progression.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to see Sean Wang's career. You know,
same.
He directed the Oscar-nominated short 99 WIPO, which was excellent, and then followed it up with Dìdi. He was at the screring of Dìdi that I saw, which was very really cool. So he briefly talked about, and some of the actors were there as well too. But yeah, this is a movie. Yeah, it's not going to be for everyone, but I think if you're in the sort of like not the higher end of the millennial age bracket, if you're in that sort of like medium to the lower end of that age bracket, I think you're really going to relate and see a version of yourself on screen, whether or not you're one of the main characters or one of the other characters, and sort of seeing how society was like at that time for our age group.
Definitely, 100%.
All right, so now we're on to our number 4 pick. We're getting there. What is your number 4 pick there, Rachel?
Number 4, we continue on the international route, and with the now Oscar winner, I'm Still Here. This is a movie by Walter Sales. This was Brazil's. If you didn't exist online, then you didn't maybe know it was Brazil's, but they went crazy.
What?
I know. They went nuts for this movie. It is a political biographical drama. It is exactly about a real life politician who went missing, whose name was Rubens Paiva. I was going to say Paiva. Thank you. Yeah. And the film, though, centers around his wife, Eunice, and that's played by Fernanda Torres. And it's about the unanswered questions that she got, what she went through as well. Like, she was kidnapped at one point, and I shouldn't say kidnapped. She went in for interrogation and was held there for a very long time. And it is just such an incredible film about this woman who carried on. And I know that sounds kind of almost simplistic and a bit derivative of the film itself, but it's to have something like that happen to your family without, like, they didn't know until the 90s what really happened to her husband. Or like they knew what happened, but not until they got official confirmation of what had happened. And to live in that, but yet still raise a family. She became a lawyer and helped out other people, and like obviously was still working on her husband's case as well. To know that this was a true story, to know that, you know, this was a lived experience by one, but also a lot of people, a lot of families would have gone through something like this under dictatorships, such as the one that was in the 70s in Brazil. I just found it to be an incredible story. And then obviously Fernanda Torres, her performance was nothing short of brilliant. I think she was so fantastic in it. She was a lot of talk about that category, the lead actress category, across all of the different awards shows this year, or last year rather. She was my pick. I thought she was just brilliant. And this film in general is so well done, so period perfect. I was, really, really taken by it. And I'm glad it did as well as it did. I am 100% behind Brazil. I'm with them. I don't want them against me either, because they seem like a really intense bunch.
Yeah, this was a movie I liked quite a bit, but I didn't love it.
What's wrong with you?
I have no heart.
Why
just
why
like
do you hate women? What's
Oh, we're starting there. All right. Yeah, I don't know what it was. It was just one of those ones I watched. I was like, oh, I enjoy it. This is a very solid 3.5-star film for me. I don't know if it was just a little too simplistic overall, or maybe I wasn't like completely bowled over by Fernanda Torres' performance in a way that I feel like a lot of other people really were. I don't think it was bad. I just didn't have the same emotional connection to it. That said, I did really appreciate the touches that they did of making the familiar places feel unfamiliar, whether it was the beach or their home or that ice cream shop, things like that, where in the movie, we get both sides of this joyous aspect and then the emptiness feeling. I think they did a very good job with that. But yeah, this is a movie that was solidly fine for me.
I also want to admit to feeling really dumb that at the end they show the character of Eunice in her older age. I was like, wow, what great makeup they did on Fernanda Torres. What an incredible job they did here of making. And it turns out I didn't find that out until like somebody posted it up on Twitter or something like that. Like I was like, oh, that's her mom, who is a very accomplished actress herself. So but I get it. You don't appreciate a woman's struggle. That's fine. It's absolutely fine.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's what I took from that.
Yeah. And this is why I fired you. Couldn't handle the dissenting opinions.
I get it, because you're like, go make me a sandwich. Stop disagreeing with me.
Yeah, even though you're in.
That was exactly a conversation that Dakota and I had.
All right, well, I'm just gonna move right along here. My number 4 film is a film called Saturday Night, directed by Jason Reitman. At 11:30 p.m. on October 11th, 1975, a ferocious troupe of young comedians and writers changed television forever. Find out what happened behind the scenes in the 90 minutes leading up to the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live. Now, I am fully aware that this movie did not work for a lot of people. Do you want to know how I know that? Because at the TIFF screening, the press screening that I went to, that was completely packed, the only people that were laughing was me and the 3 other people sitting next to me, and no one else did. And it was awkward how hard I was laughing at this film. So I knew right then and there that this movie was basically DOA. I saw it a couple weeks later at VIFF. The crowd was a little bit better because it was a public screen, not a press screening. So I appreciated that. But still, it was a lot of people going, oh, yeah, it was funny. That was about it. But I love this. I'm a big Saturday Night Live fan, and I think it did a great job of capturing this manic energy that the show has lived on for the last 50 years. The boldness that it had at the beginning especially, it's definitely softened its edges in the last couple of decades. But still, it was a very bold show, and they did a great job casting actors who towed the very fine line of doing an impression and performing a character. And I thought they did a great job with that. And it's almost a shame that, like, Gabriel LaBelle, an actor who I really like, who's playing Lorne Michaels here, who's the lead, basically is outshone by literally everyone. The big standout for me is Corey Michael Smith, who played Chevy Chase, where every moment he's on screen, he just absolutely steals the show. And he has a big confrontation with with J.K. Simmons. And the two of them going toe-to-toe, and it's hard to go toe-to-toe with J.K. Simmons, and he pulls it off, and I loved it. I will say, sort of Rachel already criticizing me on the last movie that she was talking about. The female characters in this movie are severely underdeveloped, which is a real unfortunate side effect. Most of the best moments happen to Chevy Chase or Dan Aykroyd or John Belushi or Lorne Michaels or J.K. Simmons, who's playing Milton Berle, or Willem Dafoe, who's an NBC executive, things like that. Or the guy that plays Michael O'Donoghue. And so Gilda Radner and Lorraine Newman and Jane Curtin all sort of get shafted a little bit. They do have some good moments here and there, but never as much as the guys, which is unfortunate for sure. But yeah, I just love, we were talking about ensembles earlier. I love the ensemble of this. I thought the look and feel of this was terrific. And yeah, it had me laughing from start to finish. It gave me Uncut Gems, but funnier vibes.
Probably why you liked the movie so much, though, right? The fact the women were sidelined as not just supporting, but like supporting the supporting characters. I get it. No, I understand. I didn't really know. I didn't. I think I texted you after I watched this movie, and I was really looking forward to it because I thought it could be something really amazing. I thought it would be really great for fans of the show, because there are some people who are deep into the history of Saturday Night Live or deep into the history of comedy in general in the West in particular. I think that like you can't really talk about comedy in North America without talking about Saturday Night Live, and I think that this movie is a really good document. I know it's fictional, but it's like or a fictionalization, but I think it's a very good document of what happened during that time and what was kind of on the shoulders of Lorne Michael and how fickle it was. I find that a really interesting bit. One thing that I took away from this movie that I thought was very interesting was that he was basically the first they were, or not just Lorne Michael, but all of them were the first generation of people to come up growing up with television. And they're making television now for the first time. So before it was radio people moving over to television, but now you had just the kids who grew up with nothing but TV. And it's kind of like when we see now, like the Gen Z growing up, they grew up with the internet and they are different. And I like I find it to be a really fascinating part of history in terms of entertainment history in that sense. I'm probably one of the ones who the movie just didn't really work for me. I shouldn't say it didn't work for me. I think it worked fine. I just didn't care. Like I just didn't connect with it that much. I agree. Corey Michael Smith, I think his performance, it helps. He looks like a young Chevy Chase because he really, really does look like a young Chevy Chase. I thought the performances were all really good. I liked the look of it. I liked what Jason Reitman was doing with the film. Somehow though, for me, it just kind of didn't land. And I kind of forgot about it. Like I didn't really think about it too much. I know in Toronto, the public screening they did, like the premiere public screening they did, they went all out for it. And they had it, apparently it played so well. Like it did really well. They brought the whole cast more or less, I think was in Toronto for this one. They had like a llama at the public screening. Like it did really, really well at the beginning. And it seemed to have a good hype to it in like public wise. I know critics weren't crazy about it, but like publicly speaking, I think it did play really well. And then it just kind of lost momentum. And then it didn't, they had a really weird release as well. They kind of scattered it over weeks. Like they did the New York, LA one week. Then the next week, I think Toronto and like Chicago and a few other major cities got it. And then the week after that, it went wide. And I don't really understand what the point of that was, especially because this was an anniversary year for SNL. So you kind of thought they could just release it all on the same weekend. And what like you kind of have built-in marketing because of the SNL stuff. Yeah. But for whatever reason, it just kind of got lost. And I do think it deserves, even though I didn't really take to it that much, I do think it deserves more credit than it has gotten because I do think it was a good film, just not one that was for me.
Yeah, that is completely fair, and I understand why it didn't work for a lot of people. And for some reason, it just tickled my funny bone the right way.
I didn't find it funny. Yeah, you're right. I don't think I watched it with like a handful of people. I don't think any of us really laughed. Now that I think about it, I don't think anybody really laughed, and I can't remember a moment that I thought was funny.
Wow.
I really can't remember. I can't remember much of that movie. I have to admit, it was not the most memorable film for me.
Okay.
Hey everyone, my name is Pedro Lima, and I'm a new collaborator here at the Zoom podcast. I'll be writing for the blog, especially about restorations. And I came here to talk a little about the Enxerga Documenta 14, which is a 14 hours documentary about the art exposition documenta that happens every 5 years in Germany, and it's a observational documentary that it takes its time. Literally, it has 14 hours, but it is a deep dive into the the art discussions and how creation can be elitist and how does those events come together and everything related to ethics, money, artistry, everything related to that. So if you have the opportunity to watch Enxerga Documenta 14, do it. It's a film that played at Toronto last year, at New York. I don't know if it's coming to theaters because it's such a lengthy one. But if you have the opportunity to watch it and you have the time, because it has 14 hours, I strongly recommend. So see you soon. Bye.
All right, Rachel, what is your number 3 film? We're in our top 3
Top
now.
3 is Better Man, and it is the biopic. I don't really know how to say that word. Well, either way, of Robbie Williams, who's an English singer, was a member of Take That.
Who?
Robbie Williams. Okay, this is the thing with Robbie Williams. I kind of knew who he was.
Yeah, he was popular when we were young.
I think so. Like, I think in Canada we got Take That. Because we got some British stuff. Like, we did British Irish groups. Like, they did pop up in Canada because like YTV hit list. So he like they came up. I know that there was like a big discussion online in the States that they're like, who is this guy? We don't even know who he is. And I'm like, well, whatever. That's besides the point though. But the big kind of shtick for this movie was they turned Robbie Williams into a monkey, into a chimpanzee for the whole film. And it's never discussed. Like, they never pointed out, they never do anything like that. I found it to be one of the most refreshing films of this genre, and in a genre that has become a way too saturated now with everybody's got a movie. And typically I don't like it when the person is, one, still alive, but two, is involved in the film. And Robbie Williams is very, very involved in this movie. But I appreciated that they weren't really going for accuracy. And I think that that's what trips a lot of people up when they get to these types of movies, because you get ardent fans who are like, oh, that didn't happen first. Like, this happened 2 years later or something like that. But this movie very blatantly does not put itself on accuracy. It just kind of puts itself on the emotions and what he was going through at the time. Too many stories of rock stars who don't get out of that funk of drugs, of alcohol, of that kind of lifestyle that we associate with rock stars. Too many of them don't make it through. He made it through. I think it's a really, really, one, stunning piece of film work, but a really interesting movie as well, like a really emotional film. I watched it with just me and the publicist for this movie, and both of us were just sobbing, but we didn't sit next to each other. We were respectful and gave each other a buffer of a few rows. And she told me later that she felt really unprofessional. And I felt really awkward about it, but it was just the two of us in the movie theater just sobbing at this movie, because it is very moving and there's a lot of things going on. We knew Robbie Williams. I knew some of his songs, but I didn't know him that well. Like, I'll say I knew he went through some stuff in his life. I knew that he kind of got ousted as a member of Take That. I didn't realize a lot of the stuff that he was going through. And it's a really, really incredible story. And I think it's a shame that not more people could get past the monkey thing. And I actually think the monkey thing works because you don't need to make an actor look like Robbie Williams. You can just you can bypass that thing completely. And there is obviously the thematic, like, he felt like a dancing monkey. But I think it works because they kind of go Planet of the Apes like as well. And they did get Weta involved, so the visuals look absolutely amazing too. And yeah, I loved it. I thought it's too bad it really bombed at the box office, but I thought it was such an incredible film.
Yeah, I agree. I was very adamant that I was not going to watch this movie. I was like, this movie looks
Yeah.
stupid. The trailers didn't do
Yeah.
it justice, frankly. The sequences are breathtaking. I know everyone talks about the Rock DJ sequence, but it truly is magical of what they're able to do. And you know, in the trailers and commercials, you do see Robbie Williams pop up, and he's like, "Yeah, the monkey thing is a bit weird, but you know, after a few minutes, you kind of get used to it, and you just sort of forget about it." And he's absolutely right, because like the first couple early scenes, it is a little weird, and then slowly, once he gets into it, especially as we sort of see this character change his looks and style, it works really well with the movie. Like, there's a sequence where he's bleaching his hair blonde, and it works well with where he's going, or like shaving his face, or things like that, where you're like, oh, this is kind of weird, but then like you stop thinking about that, and it just works. And I don't know what it is, where like this movie very easily could have been god awful, and I know a lot of people didn't really care for it that much, but like it sort of seems like overall the consensus was, if you watched it, you probably liked it, but no one watched it. So it's a bit of a shame that the discourse sort of overran the interest of people wanting to see it. And I don't know, like, I'd rather have obscure biopics of some unknown like Robbie Williams rather than, you know, the millionth biopic of a famous person that everyone knows. We know their whole life story, and we watch the most cleanest, sanitized version of their life. Whereas Robbie was 100% cool with, he's an asshole in the movie. He is not a good person. He screws over a lot of people, and what he does, the way he treats his girlfriend from All Saints, absolutely horrible. Like, that's all irredeemable things, and he's totally fine with being like, yeah, throw it all in there. That's my life. I did that. Why not?
So I'll say that relationship with Nicole, I found it, Nicole Appleton, I didn't know that they dated. I actually had no idea that they had ever been together. And then they do like the great needle drop of I Know Where It's At. I'm like, oh my God, that's a girl from All Saints. That's amazing. To me, the way, because there's so many montages in this movie, which I don't normally care for that many montages, but the montage they do for that relationship is just incredible. Like, it's so devastating at times, because you're right, like he treats her poorly, really poorly, and the two of them, and she had to make decisions, or decisions were made for her, that I don't want to say that they regret it. I'm not gonna put words in their mouth, but it's really life altering what happened during the course of their relationship. And to me, the way that it's presented as like almost a fairy tale, especially the way that they meet, I found that really sweet, of just like all these years that have passed. He's married, he's happy, he's got, you know, his family. She's went on to date, was it Liam, I think, from from Oasis, and has a kid with him and all that.
They're briefly together.
It's like the fact that so many years later, like we're talking a good 20, almost 30 years now, that you still look back at it in such a positive way, to show it in such like a dreamlike way, I think is really special. And it's really, I think it's just, I agree with you in that it's nice to have films like this about people who might not be as well known to a North American audience, I should say an American audience. But and it's too bad that people don't have enough kind of curiosity to go and watch it. Matthew Simpson and I talked about this, actually, about like what of a shame it was that people, even though they didn't know who he was, didn't think, oh, like, what is this? Let me, like, just out of curiosity, who is this and why does he get a movie? As opposed to saying, well, we don't know who he is, so why would we watch his movie? It's like, you don't know who.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know for I'm Still Here. I didn't know that story before, and you watch it and you're like, this is incredible. Well, I thought it was. You didn't, but you know, it's one of those things. You don't need to have recognition to enjoy something, and it was a bit disheartening when people were like, why would I go watch this? I don't even know who he is. I'm like, I don't know how to respond to that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, and definitely had me very emotional several times throughout the film.
It's weird to cry over a monkey. You're like, that's weird. Weird.
Yes. Okay, my number 3 film. You mentioned it earlier. Not that it's an overlap for us, but you wondered if it was one that I was going to have on my list, and you were right. It is Civil War from Alex Garland. In a dystopian future for journalists travel across the United States during a nationwide conflict. While trying to survive, they aim to reach the White House to interview the president before he is overthrown. And I gotta say, like, this movie is already seeming slightly prophetic, the way the breakdown of recent American events have been happening. But yeah, I think a lot of people got caught up in the, they for the promotional material, they released what the map is of the alliances. And a lot of people were like, California and Texas would never team up. This movie is ridiculous. And like, even listening to the dialogue after the movie, I feel like they're like, oh, Garland wanted to have it both ways. He wasn't, really saying what they were fighting against and all this sort of stuff, or why these factions were happening. I'm like, do people have like zero media literacy? Like, he was very explicit about the themes that he was exploring in terms of why this civil war was happening. It all starts because the president decides that he is going to serve a third term, which as of right now, is unconstitutional. And that's what set this in motion. And, it's not so thinly veiled, dig at Donald Trump, who has on multiple times suggested maybe he'll run again. Like, this is not something that is far-fetched in terms of, okay, well, what happens if that actually does occur? What would happen next? And obviously this is a very, very heightened film, but like, I think the politics are incredibly clear of what he's trying to get across here. And this was A24's highest grossing film of all time. I thought it looked great. I loved all the performances. Kirsten Dunst, Kaylee Spaney, Wagner Moura. They were all terrific. I really enjoyed them. Stephen McKinley Henderson as well. This is one that I really liked, and I thought a lot of people just misunderstood what it was trying to go for.
I don't know if people misunderstood it or so much they needed it to be incredibly clear. Like you said, like, where's media literacy?
Maybe.
It's media literacy now means they need you to spell it out, because if you are not absolutely clear, people go, well, why weren't you more direct about it? And if you're not direct about it, I hate when they say that, you're complicit. I'm like, shut up. No, you're not. Like, that's not what that means. And I agree with you. This movie, it's a wonder that it didn't. I know awards aren't everything, but it is a wonder it didn't do as well later in the year, because I just think it's probably Kirsten Dunst's best performance of her career, in my opinion. I think she's so good in it. And there's a critic in Toronto, his name's Eli Glasner. I was listening to him talk about this movie, and he was saying, like, because most of us, especially if you're of a certain age, you grew up with Kirsten Dunst. You're either around her age, or she's a little bit younger, a little bit older than you. But we grew up watching her because she started at such a young age. And to see her so, like, literally war-torn, I think that was part of what made the film as jarring as it was. Not to say she didn't do a great job just as a performance, but I think it does help that this is someone that we are so used to seeing as this youthful young woman, young girl, teenager, little girl, like when she's when she was very, very young. And to see her now, it's like, it almost feels like a reflection of the times. Like, she's moving with us in that sense. And I thought it was an incredible movie as well. I think it's so good. It's, that lighthearted buddy comedy road trip movie that we're all looking for these days. It's just, I think it was a real test of people's media literacy, and I think people failed spectacularly at it. And it's not to say, like, for us to sit here and be like, we're smarter and better than everybody, but I agree, people missed the point severely on this film. But I did think, coming out of this movie, I'm like, in a way, one side of the aisle is gonna write off this movie completely, because it's they're just gonna think it's liberal nonsense or whatever. But then the other side of the aisle is not going to be happy with it either, because it is not clear enough. It is not. There's too much left unsaid by design, but enough that people are going to be like, well, why didn't you make a statement about it and, like, really participate in the politics or whatever? And it's also, I think, a shame. Like, we talked about the trailer for Better Man. I think the trailer for this didn't do it, because it made it look like a war movie, which it is. But
like an action,
but it's more of a film like photojournalism and that kind of thing, whereas the trailer
and grief and trauma and things like that. Yeah.
and the way they positioned it, people went into it thinking they were literally watching like a civil war. They were going to go watch a war movie, and it's not that at all. And especially with the political climate as it is in the States, people were really expecting this really heightened political war. But again, it's not about that. It is about a lot of other things are associated with the war, but it's not about the war itself. And I think that might have tripped some people up too. But it's an incredible movie.
And, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Jesse Plemons.
Oh, God, he's so
only
good.
in one scene. Yeah, and just completely steals the show, and probably one of the greatest like small acting
100%.
performances ever. Just absolutely terrifying. The question of what kind of American are you, and like knowing that no matter what answer you give is the wrong answer.
Also, like a surprise role for him. They had another actor lined up, and he just like, I think that actor dropped out or whatever, things happened, and then Kirsten Dunst goes home and goes like, "Hey, do you mind coming in and doing this?" And him being the great Jesse Plemons that he is, he came in and absolutely knocked it. And I would like to think he thought, I have these really great sunglasses that I'd like to wear in this, and so he brought those in himself. Because terrifying.
Yeah.
He's terrifying in this movie.
Yeah, it's sort of a continuation from like his performance in something like Game Night, where he does this really unnaturally creepy silence.
I mean, it starts from Breaking Bad, doesn't it? Like it starts from that. He looks so much like Matt. He's like Matt Damon's evil twin. He just
Meth Damon is his nickname.
It's incredible. Like, but he's so good. He's really, really great. Yeah.
All right, well, let us move on to our number 2 films. What was your number 2 film, Rachel?
Number 2, we continue on with the politics that potentially got mixed in with this movie, but September 5. And apparently they don't want it called September 5th, September 5. And it is a retelling of the Munich massacre that happened in 1972, but from the perspective of the broadcast booth of ABC Sports, who were like a handful of broadcast teams. Like at that time, America had like 3 channels, and ABC is one of them. And they're there covering the Olympics for the sports coverage, and then all of this stuff starts to happen. They're the only, I believe, American crew that is on the ground, or like the only crew, I think not even just American, they're the only ones who are on the ground, who are able to get in there and provide a real-time coverage. Similar to what we talked about with Saturday Night, actually, about like the changing of television, how that was the first generation that came television. This is the first time an event like this is being broadcast live on television, on national television in the US. And it raises a lot of questions about what can they show, what should they show, because there's no guidelines for it just yet, because nobody's really contemplated what if a terrorist attack happens on the air, what if somebody gets killed on the air, live on the air, like how does that work? And then also about something that is still relevant today, which is when, you know, what's more important, the scoop and being first and being able to tell it, or being factual? And I think the answer should be obvious, but it's not always obvious. I think this movie does such an incredible job of recreating the broadcast booth. I was really fascinated to see like how they put together the slides, like how analog it was, how hands-on it felt, like putting the name of somebody in the caption. Now it's just on a computer and just have the lower third and you just they type their name in. But back then it's like they really had to put the letters on there. If you wanted to have a close-up of a picture, somebody actually had to take a picture and zoom in, develop it in a dark room, and then bring it out and then put it on air. It's really a fascinating look at how television worked at the time. Commentary on journalism, still prevalent today. I know that the actual events that they're talking about are sadly still topical. And I do think that people, like we talk about media literacy, it got a bit maybe muddled in. And I personally didn't, I mean, I don't want to say I didn't see the politics in it, because I did, obviously. But to me, it wasn't so much about who was doing what and what were the reasons behind what was going on during the Olympics, but more about the journalism side of it, which I found really fascinating.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think that's what they were trying to focus more on, and in doing so, made people even more upset
Yeah,
that they didn't focus on the
yeah,
politics, which is frustrating because it's a bit of a no-win situation, frankly.
100%.
Yeah, I love the tactile nature that you were describing and the way they make a news program. Like that was just so fascinating. And the combination of archival footage of the real
Mm-hmm.
broadcasters where we're seeing how it looked to produce that aspect, and then we're seeing like basically actors being the back of their head sort
Yeah.
of thing was fantastic. Um, I think the movie, I don't even know how to say it. I don't. The one thing I wish they went a little bit deeper. There's, this really intense moment when they are filming the hotel where these hostages are being held, and they see the TV is on,
Mm,
and John Magaro is like, "Can they see what we're
yeah.
seeing? Can they see what we're seeing?" And he's asking that question over and over again. And I kind of wish they went a little bit deeper into the philosophy of what are the ramifications of broadcasting this when everyone, which means also the hostage takers, can see what you're filming. And I think they kind of touch on it, and then they very quickly shift to other stuff, whether it's the incompetence of the German military and the police, the journalism ethics, which I thought was all excellent, especially at the very end, where he has a very important choice to make, and the sort of consequences of that, the choice he decides to go with, was all very fascinating.
It's such like a window into the infancy of television. And I think because
Mm-hmm.
we think of it as obviously with such commonplace for us, right? Like I mean, television's almost being like phased out at this point with the way streaming goes. But it's like it's it's a moment in time that I don't know if I really appreciated how much television changed things. Um, Not just like for our general entertainment, but for the way that like we talk a lot about how we consume news now, which is maybe not the greatest way to consume news, but I think this movie does a really good job of showing kind of the beginning points of when news consumption was not the day after. It was not, you didn't watch it on you didn't read it in the paper and the next day, you didn't listen to it on the radio the next morning. Like you could watch something happen right before your eyes, and the fact that journalists had to make decisions really quickly. But the interesting thing too is not to say these guys weren't journalists, they are, but um this is a sports crew. Like they're there to cover sports.
Mm-hmm.
This is not within their wheelhouse to do. This was not something within their purview, but they did it, and I think they did it pretty well, all things considered. But yeah, it's a fascinating film that I understand people being a bit hesitant about it because of the politics behind the events and what's going on today. But it is, I think, an incredible work of film, and the production design is really, really great as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. Okay, well, let me move on to my number two pick, and this is our second overlap. We only have two overlaps this whole list, and that is Sing Sing for me. You already talked about that as your number 9 film. Yeah, you mentioned all the stuff that was great about this. This is just such an affecting movie where what Coleman Domingo is doing of giving a window into this man and his soul is just so powerful. Uh, it made me very emotional multiple times, and the fact that he tries to be, this guy who's on the road to rehabilitation and redemption, and yet he has this really pivotal moment where one of the other prisoners who he starts helping with his parole hearing ends up getting paroled, and he's like, well, what the hell, why not me? Like, I'm more rehabilitated than you are. And like this anger that he still has inside of that he lashes out against everyone is just so powerful to watch. And the cinematography in this is excellent. It's got this very sort of like muted palette, uh, film stock grain look to it. And there's a couple moments, like there's this one scene where Coleman Domingo's talking in his cell with the guy who lives in the cell next to him, and the sun is setting, and just everything is awash in red. It's just so stunningly beautiful. And there's so many beautiful moments like this where they just capture the magic of when they go into this theater world, that they feel released. They are no longer prisoners, because the old adage of the only prison is your mind, sort of Shawshank Redemption speak, basically. And these men absolutely encapsulate that, of when we see them in this world, how for a brief moment in time, they're not locked up for a crime or a mistake that they made. There's not people pointing guns at them all the time, or the threat of violence from the other inmates, or things like that, or missing things on the outside world, whether it's being disconnected from your family, or just the world in general. That includes politics, technology, pop culture, all this sort of stuff you're just completely separated from. And yes, Coleman Domingo is the big name in this film. Paul Raci's the other big name. And then it's just a whole bunch of, these former inmates who are basically playing versions of themselves, which is crazy.
Yeah, I think it's that scene you talk about where Coleman Domingo lashes out everyone. I think it's such a great moment, because I think that it exemplifies why that rehabilitation program works so well. Like, often people who work in theater or work as actors, they talk a lot about how that is like a safe space to them. Like, they feel like they can express any and all emotion. Actors are always like, we're always looking for the truth, which sounds really pretentious, but like, that is what they go for. And I think that it shows the fact that the other inmates welcome him back in, they forgive him, and they kind of give him the space to be angry about something that I'm sure they all very much understand very intrinsically. I think that moment is, I mean, that was like the Oscar moment for him, right? And it's a really beautiful part of the movie that it just expresses why the program is so needed, why arts are so needed, and whether it's in a prison or in schools. And it's an incredible film that I think maybe not a lot of people watched it, but I think it is going to be one that in a long time from now, it's going to be like, people are going to keep revisiting it. And when they talk about 2024 as a movie year, I think Sing Sing will come out really, really nicely.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be one of those ones that its reputation is going to grow over 100%. The years as it slowly finds its audience.
For sure. And it's just like you said it before, it's just accessibility. Like, people just didn't have a way to watch it. And I think once people find a way to watch it, then absolutely they're going to love it.
Hi, my name is Marta Georgievich, journalist and author of the weekly publication and soon-to-be podcast rewindandrevive.com, and content creator at marta.mcfly. I chose All We Imagine Is Light as my favorite film of 2024 because it's the one that truly snuck up on me. It's a quiet, beautifully meditative film about 3 nurses in Mumbai, each navigating loneliness, love, and change in their own way. Payal Kapadia's direction is so delicate and assured. Nothing dramatic happens, yet every moment feels deeply felt. The film captures that kind of wistful, in-between space of life where longing and routine coexist. And then, when it finally shifts from the city to the countryside, there's this subtle magic to it. By the time the credits rolled, I realized how much it had gotten under my skin. It's tender, nostalgic, and above all, an ode to female friendship. Just a stunning, immersive experience overall.
All right, Rachel, we are now here for our number 1 picks. What is your favorite film from 2024?
My favorite film 2024 is one that I watched in 2023, and I will admit I didn't even realize got a 2024 release in Canada until I was looking back at what movies had come out, what was eligible for the year. And when I saw this one, I went, oh yeah, that's my number 1. For sure, it's my number 1. It's called Mars Express. It is a French animated sci-fi movie. It's about it's a different world. It's not set in our present day, where robots are very prevalent, and there's like jailbreaking of that, and then it's kind of like a mystery thriller, because they're going to find there's like a student who's jailbreaking these androids and so on and so forth. The point is, the reason I love this movie is I've never seen, we talk about Dune and world building. This movie, I think, builds a world in such a way that I was fascinated by, especially because it's animated, I think, but maybe the animation helps with it to help you kind of blend into the world, because you don't need to worry about realism. But it's, to me, one of the best forms or best examples of storytelling that we have in film right now. And it's such a great movie that I want more people to go and watch it. And I'll say, I posted my top 10 on Instagram in December, I think it was, sometime towards the end of the year, or maybe it was in January, I can't remember now. But Simon Best from the Awesome Friday podcast with Matthew Simpson, he messaged me and told me he went to go watch it after he saw me list it, because he'd never heard of it and he loved it as well. So Simon Best also endorses it. So I'm going to just say it's a really good movie. And I know it's a bit of an out there pick. It's not a film that is widely available to people. Not one that made a lot of buzz here. But like anybody who has watched it, if you look at like reviews and things like that, everyone loves it, because it is, the world building in it, I can't stress it enough, is just absolutely incredible. And it's an engaging story, really entertaining. I think that they can go many different places with this world and franchise if they wanted to build it as a franchise. I think it could be really, really interesting. The animation's nothing special. It's just very flat 2D normal animation. So technically, in that sense, it's not anything to write home about, but it's just really, really well done storytelling. Great voice performances. I can't say enough good things about it. I think it's an incredible film.
I have literally never heard of it, so that's a lie. I heard of it when in our if we were Oscar voters article,
Yeah.
you made this your top pick for animated film. And I was like, don't know what that movie is.
It's so good. Like it is one of these random, like I'll say it again, I didn't even know it got a release in Canada. Like it was so quiet, and I was waiting for it to get released in North America, because I figured it would get released in North America. Oh no, because they announced it after I watched it at a festival in Quebec. I think it was Festival du Nouveau, if I'm not mistaken, in Montreal. And I just fell in love with it. And then I think I heard a month or two later that it got picked up for a North American release. But then the release came and went, and I didn't know about it, which is a shame, because it is good. So I was like, Simon, he's out in Vancouver, so he found it and he was able to watch it, and then he bought the DVD, or the Blu-ray, I should say.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, good for him. And, based on everything you're saying about it, it does sound very interesting, and I should check this out. It does seem like it would be something up my alley.
Very cool movie.
Yeah. I have nothing to add, because I literally know nothing about this movie. Like, I've even heard other people talk about it. You were the only person I've heard mention this movie.
It was a very hipster number one pick for me. But like, in a year that as much as I love the movies that I put on there, it's a year that I felt a bit like they're all right. Mars Express, once I realized that I could put it on the list, it was like automatic number one for me. I was like, well, that's it. That's the number one movie.
Yeah. Normally I'm the one with the
hipster
pick, but no, this year too.
French animated sci-fi. That's how I roll these days.
Right. Well, my number one film is a movie called Conclave, directed by Edward Berger. When Cardinal Lawrence is tasked with leading one of the world's most secretive and ancient events, selecting a new pope, he finds himself at the center of a web of conspiracies and intrigue that could shake the very foundation of the Catholic Church. As a recovering Catholic, I know a lot about this stuff, as much as, the outside world does know about this stuff. So I have a cursory knowledge. And it was basically like a better version of like a Dan Brown book, Da Vinci Code, stuff like that. That one, those stories definitely go far more into like the mysticism and, cult, the seedier cult-like aspects of the Catholic Church, which is interesting, but I don't know how truthful any of that is. Whereas this really did feel like it could be real. And they do a good job of, one, the Pope that dies, they never name him. But they offer real-life hints of past popes. So this really feels like maybe not quite an alternate timeline, but like very slightly adjacent to our current timeline, which I really liked. And we were both a big fan of Berger's last film, All Quiet on the Western Front. I'm pretty sure that was your movie of the year, if I'm remembering correctly, or if not, top 3 for
Number
sure.
one movie of the year. It was.
Well, yeah, there we go. Yeah. And, I'm just impressed of his ability to capture scale and wonder and beauty and darkness all at the same time. And I feel like he's sort of someone similar to Denis Villeneuve, where he is great at bringing all the different departments together for something truly special and unique. Like the lighting in this all looks fantastic. The production design is great. The costumes are great. The score is great. All that sort of stuff, which add up to a great film. There's no weak point for me. And I know some people maybe found this movie a little trite or ridiculous or whatever, but, I love this sort of this political intrigue thriller set on the back of the Catholic Church, and they did such a good job, and all the performances were great. And like, I rewatched it just before the Oscars, and I was kind of disappointed that Cardinal Tedesco, the Italian vaping cardinal, didn't get more recognition. Sergio Castellitto is his name, where I thought he was great. It's such a great little villainous performance with some good humor. I really appreciate him. And Isabella Rossellini just crushes it in her very tiny performance. I know a lot of people are mad that she got nominated. I'm like, no, that's what a supporting role is. It doesn't have to be, someone like Kieran Culkin who's in every single scene, but, because Jesse Eisenberg is in 2 extra scenes at the beginning and end, he's suddenly the lead. No, this is what also a supporting performance looks like. And these ones should be recognized with a critical acclaim too.
I'm one of those. I don't think Isabella Rossellini was that great because my thing is I don't mind that it's a quieter role. Like I agree with you. You don't need to be like I think Jesse Plemons in the small amount of screen time that he was in Civil War. It's like that to me is a great supporting role, and that's it. You don't need to be Kieran Culkin. You don't need to be 50% of the movie. I just don't think, and it's not her fault. I just don't think that like her presence, not that it didn't do anything, because I think it did. I think the role is important. The role of the nuns is very important in the film of such like a patriarchal, yeah, and very male dominated by design, by tradition, story. You have these women in there who are kind of meant to be the voice of reason in many ways, and I don't know. It to me, it wasn't a performance that I thought I was like, not that it didn't deserve to be there. It just wasn't. It wouldn't have been my pick. I'll say that. Like I wouldn't have put her in for supporting because I just don't think it was strong enough in comparison to others. But not to say that I don't think it wasn't deserving because I think she's incredible, obviously, and the role is really important. I did like this movie. I thought it was really good. For me, they lost me on the ending because it just felt like it came out of nowhere. I don't want to spoil it for people, but it just felt like really unearned. Although I looked it up later and it turns out that's how the book was written. But I think in the book, it is better about leaving kind of breadcrumbs towards that final reveal. But
yeah, I read the book and I do.
Yeah, and so in the film, it just feels it and. We talk about media literacy, it feels like it was there for internet points. And that's why I was like, is this how it was written or did they put this in to make it something? And I think it does say something really interesting, but I actually thought it was like I love the way that it's so obviously it's a very religious procedure. Like what's going on is incredibly rooted in religion, but there's a lot of like secular politics that get involved in this decision as it naturally does, because that's just kind of how humans work. And I thought that was really interesting. It's funny. It works really well as a political thriller. Like I found that was a really interesting part of it. I thought the performance, like Stanley Tucci, John Lithgow, I think everyone is so good in the movie. And technically, I completely agree with you about Edward Berger. He's my guy. I love that dude, and I think he's incredibly talented as a director, and pulling everybody together, like you said. Yeah, it's one that I really did like it. It just kind of lost me in that last little bit.
Okay. Yeah. I understand, and like I also agree that the ending isn't totally perfect. But I still really liked it and liked that they were trying to do something that was a bit of a
Mm-hmm.
shakeup of what we
Sure.
expected. So in that sense, it worked. It was really cool. I saw it for the first time at VIF, and the actor that played Cardinal Benitez was in
Oh,
the
cool.
audience, but like not there to like do a Q&A. He was just there to watch the film because he's Vancouver based.
I didn't
And so
know
as I was
that.
leaving the theater,
That's
as
neat.
I was leaving the theater, I was like, "Is that Cardinal
So
Benitez?"
he just showed up as like an audience member. That's
Yeah,
really
and like
funny.
people were like starting to crowd around him in the lobby. I'm like, "Oh, damn, that's really cool." But I let him be.
Look
And
at
then
you.
I
You
heard a
let
funny
him be. I
story.
enjoy that.
I know. He had too big of a crowd on him already, anyways. And then a funny story is because he is Vancouver based. I was talking about this movie with a friend of mine who's like, "Oh, about 4 years ago, he auditioned for a student film that my friend was directing and I was working
Wow.
on, and he didn't get the part."
My God.
Yeah,
How life can change in that little
yeah,
time. That's incredible.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
great, like, there's nothing, to me, it's one of those very technically proficient films. Everything about it, like,
Yeah.
you can't put a mark against it in terms of its filmmaking. um I would argue that in terms of storytelling you can, but I think in terms of actual filmmaking, I don't know if there was a movie that was done better than this one, because everything about it was just
Hmm.
absolutely incredible.
Yeah. And these, I feel like it's been said ad nauseum, but like this is the type of film that was a dime a dozen in the
Yeah,
90s and early
100%.
2000s and are just completely extinct. And maybe that's why I like it, because it's one of those films, but done on such a proficient level that like I really appreciate a good sort of like political thriller, intrigue thriller, that sort of thing that like every director has a couple of these in their filmography from the 80s to the 2000s, and now are just completely extinct.
It's true. Yeah.
Or you only get it on Netflix,
It's
and it's like the worst slop you've ever seen.
it's interesting to, it's like 20, maybe 30 years ago, I guess. Now time's running away. This would have been the shoe-in for best picture, right? Like this
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
would have been the one that, watching it, it's like this is the traditional best picture pick.
yeah,
Which oddly enough seems to be like a mark against it now, which is unfair.
yeah.
But I completely agree with you. It is, anytime we watch those movies, that I think kind of throws it back to filmmaking, mid budget filmmaking. I don't even know if this is considered mid budget. I don't know what the budget on this movie was, but it's, anytime that you see a film that kind of goes towards that angle, I think it's just a reminder, I think, for especially for our generation, of why we like movies as much as we do.
Yeah. No, that's a good one. Yeah, according to IMDb, it says the budget was 20
Yeah, there you go.
million, the estimated budget, which
These
is
days,
ridiculously
yeah.
small for a big budget
Yeah.
film. Like this is basically a mid budget.
And to have that ensemble on that budget,
Yeah.
like these are actors who clearly took a pay cut, but obviously actors who can afford to take a pay cut for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Like I'm sure all the money went into the production design for this film.
It's beautiful, like a
Yeah.
genuinely really beautiful, how they did that, and the costumes too. Like
Yeah.
I remember looking at the costume design and thinking like, it's just kind of, I think I said this in our Oscar article, actually. Like, I think initially I was like, it's just like you're making Pope stuff, Cardinal stuff, whatever. But then when you really think about it, like, it's the way it's done, because it is so well known, not well known, but like we've seen it before. Like if you've just watched the news,
Mm-hmm.
you've seen it. It makes it that much almost more difficult, I think. And they do it really, really well. Incredible movie.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, there are our top 10 films. I think we both have a couple honorable mentions that I'm just going to quickly throw out there. For me, it's The Apprentice, Universal Language, The Substance, Anora, and The Piano Lesson are my next 5 films. None of them made your list either, so I know we were talking about maybe trying to pick some movies that didn't get some love. But yeah, those are all films that I really enjoyed. It took a second watch of Anora for me to get very high on it. I was so on it the first watch, and the second time I was like, okay, I get it now.
I probably should do that for Nora. I agree with you. I'm a bit okay on it. It's that, like, I'm like, I get it. It's good. But whatever. Maybe I'll watch it again sometime. My 5 honorable picks would be Maria, Nickel Boys, Seguridad, which is a Canadian documentary, The Shadow Strays, and Late Night with the Devil.
Interesting group.
Yeah.
Picks there. Like it. Well, I want to thank Jeff Ballmer from Classic Movies Live, Brian Loomis from What a Picture, Pedro Lima from ContraZoomPod.com, and Marta Georgievich from Rewind and Revive for sending in their voicemails. Check out the show notes to find links to their work. This is the last episode of Season 10, if you can believe it. I'll be back in a couple weeks. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. I'll be back in a couple weeks to recap the nominations for the Canadian Screen Awards before taking another couple weeks off and getting back into the swing of things with Season 11. As always, if you are not subscribed to the show, please do so and give us a rating on your platform of choice. I know every podcast says this, but it really helps us grow and find new listeners. So if you could do that, it'd be very much appreciated. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on today. It is always so much fun getting to talk movies with you.
Thank you for having me on. Again, glad we could put aside our differences. It's good.
Yeah, I'll invite you back next year.
Maybe you can have some more female films, like female-led ones, in the actual top 10, not just as your honorable mentions. You know.
Yeah, I put Substance in an Or in my honorable mentions. Yeah,
just throw them in there just to make it look good. I get it.
Now, I also had Civil War and Challengers. That's very good. I guess the Sea of the Sacred Fig.
I don't think you're making the point you think you're making.
You know what, Rachel? Where can listeners find your work, and is there anything you want to promote right now?
Go on rachelho.com. Probably the thing right now, I did an interview with Adam Egoyan. Feels like a million years ago now, but I really enjoy it. For a movie that Seven Veils, that I wasn't huge on, I really enjoyed talking to him about the movie, and it actually gave me a bit of a different perspective on it. So yeah, you can go check that out. It's on Exclaim. But otherwise, I'm on Instagram _RachelKH, and that's about it.
Nice. Well, I will link to that in the show notes as well. This has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. Follow the show on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at ContraZoomPod. What were your favorite films of 2024? Leave a comment on Spotify or send us an email. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.